Theatrical movies based on cartoons have always been pretty fascinating to me. There must be something magical about getting invested in an animated series, and then a few years later, said animated series would get a movie for the silver screen. With this, you'd get to see the characters you grew to love go on a higher stakes adventure that offers some brand new challenges internally and or externally. You'd get to see the visuals get a massive upgrade with more fluid animation and more detailed backgrounds. And extra shading, you can't forget shading. Maybe you'd get to meet new characters played by celebrities. And all of that would be topped off with a gorgeous orchestral score surrounding just about every scene. Plenty of videos on this topic have been made before, but there's one in particular that really intrigued me. I remember watching a video by the Glad Gladiator going over the history of theatrical cartoon movies, and how they've sort of become a lost art in recent years. It's a pretty interesting video, you should definitely check it out. Anyway, that video gave me an idea. A lot of videos about this topic only really cover a few movies. But what if someone were to take it a step further? What if, instead of just a few movies, I talk about
every single freaking one of them to ever exist in the history of ever!
And here I am doing exactly that. I'm going to be reviewing all these movies in the order they were released in. That way I'll sort of be giving my own perspective on the subgenre's history. There are some ground rules you should go over first though. First one goes without saying, but theatrical films only. No TV or direct-to-video shit. Second, animated films only. No live-action adaptations. Third, no foreign animated movies like the Pokemon movies or the Shaun the Sheep movie. Not that I don't care about foreign stuff. This video is just long enough with all the mainstream films I have to cover. Fourth, the movies have to be based on a specific cartoon show or a specific iteration of a cartoon series. Fifth, I'm only going to be discussing movies based on traditional TV shows, so I'm not discussing anything based on theatrical shorts or direct-to-video specials. Lastly, no movies that were released before a cartoon show, even if the cartoon that spun off from it is more famous. Main examples being the Jimmy Neutron movie, the Barnyard movie, the Care Bears movies, and the Curious George movie. Alright, is there anything else I'm forgetting? No, I think that's about it. Anyway, with all that said and done, let's get this ball rolling. Our journey begins in 1964, as that year saw the release of the very first mainstream theatrical movie based on a cartoon show. I don't really think Yogi Bear needs much of an introduction. He's one of the most famous characters in the Hanna-Barbera catalog. Originally starting off as secondary segments in the Huckleberry Hound show, but was popular enough to spin off into a separate TV show in 1961. And that was popular enough to warrant the theatrical movie. This was the last thing to come out of the main Yogi Bear franchise until the new Yogi Bear show in the late 80s. Meaning this movie is sort of a finale for the original series. Get ready to hear shit like that a lot throughout this video. The movie follows Yogi about to be transported to a zoo in California, after Ranger Smith gets fed up with his shenanigans trying to steal picnic baskets from park guests. Yogi tricks another bear into going instead, and runs away deeper into the woods. Yogi would use this opportunity to steal food in secret, but everyone just thinks he's gone, including his friends Boo Boo and Cindy. Cindy, having a massive crush on Yogi, decides to misbehave so she can get transported to a zoo in hopes of seeing Yogi again. However, she's transported to a zoo in St. Louis. Cindy is then captured by two struggling circus owners, and is forced to perform in their circus. Yogi eventually finds out Cindy's gone, and goes off to save her with Boo Boo. I think the film's biggest issue is the pacing. Rescuing Cindy is supposedly the main plot, but she doesn't really get captured until like halfway through the movie. And when the two eventually rescue her, there's still like 20 or 30 minutes of movie left. So the three of them are just dicking around going to random locations, until Ranger Smith comes along to take them back. The fact that Cindy herself is barely an interesting character really doesn't help much either. Her only character trait is being in love with Yogi. That's almost all she talks about throughout the film. There's also the fact that at the beginning of the movie, we see Yogi doesn't really have that much interest in Cindy, but then later on in the film, without any explanation or build-up, Yogi is just in love with Cindy. Fantastic love story right there. It's like they didn't know what they wanted the film to be about. First it's about Yogi running away and stealing people's food in secret, now it's about Cindy getting captured by a circus and Yogi and Boo Boo have to save her, and now it's about them being lost in New York. A story about characters leaving their main setting for this big adventure would become a frequent trope in these kinds of movies, and here I think it could have been interesting. To my knowledge, Yogi doesn't really leave Jellystone Park in the series, but what could have been an interesting story is ultimately kind of ruined by the film's poor pacing. Oh yeah, I never got to mention this, but the film is also a musical, and not a great one. Not only are the songs kind of forgettable, but they don't really add anything meaningful to the narrative, and are just there to fill in more time. Okay, so the story isn't great, but there are still things I liked about this movie. Visually, the movie is on point. I especially love how Jellystone Park looks. They really took advantage of the larger budget to make it look freaking huge. The film is also fairly funny, there are some pretty decent gags. mainly within the first 12 or so minutes, which kind of showcases a day in the life of Yogi Bear. You know, with him coming up with schemes to steal food from park guests, and Ranger Smith stopping him. Not only are these parts a nice way of introducing these characters to newcomers, but they're still pretty enjoyable and creative on their own. If anything, they kinda piqued my interest in this cartoon. Despite some nice looking backgrounds and a few good jokes, Hey There It's Yogi Bear is pretty unfocused and messy. Definitely not the worst film in this video, but there are still much better ones to come. Fast forward to just 2 years later, and another iconic Hanna-Barbera property gets time to shine on the big screen. The Flintstones also doesn't need much of an introduction. It was immensely popular when it first came out, being the first animated series to air on primetime television. And for a while, it was a franchise Hanna-Barbera would do a lot with. This movie was also the last thing to come out of the original series, as it ended its run 4 months prior to the film's release. The movie follows a spy who looks identical to Fred Flintstone getting severely injured during a mission. The spy chief then stumbles upon the actual Fred Flintstone and decides to send him to Paris on a mission to stop a villain called the Green Goose, not telling Fred it's a supervillain and is just a bird. Fred can't tell anyone about the mission though, not even his loved ones. So throughout the movie, Fred is constantly balancing his vacation in Europe with his mission. You know, I never really watched the original Flintstones, but despite this setting, isn't it supposed to be more of a slice-of-life franchise? Do fans consider this jarring to make it a spy parody all of a sudden? This is a pretty frequent problem a lot of movies based on slice-of-life cartoons face, not just the theatrical ones, where they have to make these crazy, out-of-place genre shifts to justify being a movie. Some movies in this video are a good example of what I mean. Anyway, is this movie still any good? Well, for starters, the pacing is a lot better than Yogi Bear's. Feels like they knew exactly what kind of story they wanted to tell. It's not perfect though. This movie's also a musical, and not only are the songs even more forgettable, but also barely add anything to the story. Like, did Pebble seriously need her own song? I also think Fred balancing his mission with his loved ones could have been handled a little better. We don't really get to see how that negatively affects his relationship with Wilma, Barney, and Betty. The closest thing we get is a moment where Wilma sees Fred dancing with a lady who's involved with the mission, and Wilma won't even listen to Fred when he tries to explain himself. I love forced misunderstandings. The animation is also noticeably weaker this time around, not being nearly as fluid as Yogi's. But there still are some pretty nice backgrounds, and I do like this style change they used for one of the musical numbers. On the topic of stuff I like, it is really fun to see how modern for the 60s technology works in this world. Something I am aware this franchise is known for. My favorites are probably seeing how airline and cameras work. The Green Goose isn't really that great of a villain, but I do kind of like how they pull a Fire Lord Ozai and don't show what he looks like until near the end of the movie. It's a neat touch, really adds a lot of mystery surrounding the character. I could do without his racist caricature henchmen though. I also kind of like this one scene where Barney gets tortured by the Green Goose, and this is meant to interrogate Fred who's just standing out in the open unguarded. It's pretty humorous. And that's all I really have to say. Man Called Flintstone is a slight improvement over the previous movie, but not by much. Both of these movies were flawed in terms of story, yet ultimately harmless overall. Maybe I would have appreciated them more had I watched the cartoons they were based on, but at the very least, they did get me somewhat interested in checking them out at some point. The 70s didn't really have any mainstream cartoon to theatrical movies. This trend wouldn't start up again until the 80s. You know, the time where just about every cartoon was solely made to boost toy sales. Don't expect me to have a lot to say about the films of this era. I'm sure some are familiar with Mighty Mouse. He originated in a series of theatrical shorts that ran from 1942 to 1961, and later he got a TV show in 1979. The show didn't last very long though, ending its run the very next year. The TV show had a series of serialized segments called Mighty Mouse and the Space Chase. Filmation, the company that produced the series, saw the success of Star Wars, looked at the segments within the show, and thought to themselves, hey, what if we put these cheap-ass segments in theaters? So they took the segments, stitched them together, and put it in theaters considering it a movie. Yeah, stuff like that will be another frequent theme with these movies, with them originally being standalone episodes of TV movies, but made into theatrical movies in the last minute, so the companies behind them can make an extra buck. The Space Chase movie didn't do very well financially, and due to a lack of proper DVD releases, it became a pretty obscure piece of media. As for the movie itself, boy does this story not work as a feature film. Not just with the lackluster 80s TV quality animation, but the story is just all over the place. The main plot involves Harry the Heartless wanting to steal a doomsday device from a mouse planet. Then there's a bunch of other little plots like the Queen Mouse character and Harry switching bodies, and Mighty Mouse going on trial after being framed for stealing the device. It's really not hard to tell that these were initially just separate segments from a TV show. There's also the fact that the characters are pretty one-dimensional. Mighty Mouse is a generic hero character, the Queen Mouse is just a girl, and Harry the Heartless is a straightforward goofy bad guy. Dim-witted henchman and all. I guess there are still some pretty decent jokes, like this one where there's an asteroid belt that's an actual belt, or one of the more powerful elements needed for the Doomsday device being in a kid's chemistry set at a toy store. As a serialized set of segments, I'm sure Space Chase would have been fine. I did get some enjoyment out of it, but as a movie, it really doesn't work, and I really don't have much to say about this one. He-Man is one of the most successful and iconic franchises of the 80s, and another one I'm not super familiar with, despite knowing a few things about it. Part of me is looking forward to that new live-action movie, mainly because Unikitty's gonna be in it. Going back to the He-Man movie that's actually available to watch, Secret of the Sword follows He-Man, as he's called upon by the Sorceress of Grayskull to search for someone in another dimension a certain sword is calling upon. He-Man meets a group of rebels who are up against the corrupt ruler of the homeland, Hordak. He-Man is then captured by someone working for Hordak, Adora. During his imprisonment, He-Man suggests to Adora that she looks around the kingdom and really process the evil Hordak has been doing. She does just that, and not only does Adora join He-Man, but it turns out this is the same woman the sword was looking for, and Adora uses the sword to become Shira. Part of me had a feeling Adora would become Shira, but it's also revealed that Shira is He-Man's long-lost sister, which was pretty surprising for me. The movie states that when they were babies, Adora was kidnapped by Hordak, with Skeletor even working with him. When it comes to the story, it's unsurprisingly another paper-thin good versus evil story. The only thing that really stood out to me was Adora's redemption. I suppose it is interesting enough for an 80s cartoon hero. Hordak and Skeletor also team up briefly towards the end of the movie, so that's Kino, I guess. The animation once again also doesn't scream theatrical release. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this movie was supposed to be a 5-part pilot for the Shira series, but was stitched together as a movie late into production. 6 months after the film would release, the movie would air on TV in 5 parts, even adding new scenes and stuff. Not a great movie, but hey, I did learn a little more about the He-Man mythos coming out of it. Now it's time to talk about possibly the most iconic and beloved animated series from the 80s. Is anyone here familiar with the Littles? Yeah, I didn't think so. This is actually one of the few cartoons that I've never heard of before doing research for this video. The Littles started off as a series of books written by John Peterson that first started publishing in 1967. The animated series based on the books will come out in 1983, with it being produced by the one animation company with a funny name. You know, the company that produced the Mario cartoons and Inspector Gadget. The show is about a family of tiny elf creatures called... Fuck do you think? Who live in the walls of a house and go about their lives, whilst trying not to get noticed by the humans they're living with. At least that's what I've come to understand. When it comes to the movie, it follows this human kid, Kevin McAllister over here, going to live with his uncle while his parents are lost in the jungle somewhere. The two Littles kids try getting a lucky rabbit foot into his suitcase, but they end up falling in and are taken to the uncle's place. Once they get there, the uncle treats Kevin like complete garbage, making him work constantly and keeping him locked in his room. The Littles kids then overhear that the uncle is planning to have the house he used to live in destroyed. So the Littles, along with the grandpa and cousin who arrive to help the kids get back, have to make it home and help out the Littles' parents before it's too late. One thing I'll give the film is that some of the set pieces can be pretty fun and creative, like them using a paintbrush to bait a cat, and the Littles' boy getting stuck in a jar of honey. Then again, stuff like this is always kind of a given with stories about tiny characters, or characters who can shrink. Stakes are definitely here, but I'd be lying if I said I really cared about the main kid. A common problem with a lot of these movies is that they often struggle with being a movie to satisfy fans of the show they're based on, whilst also being a standalone movie that newcomers can get into. The movie definitely helped me understand the concept of the Littles, but the movie just opens with a kid getting ready to leave. We're just kind of thrusted into things without getting to know him beyond his parents being lost somewhere. And throughout the movie, he's kind of a blank slate. Granted, the uncle is a cruel bastard, and the kid definitely doesn't deserve to be treated so poorly by him, but still. I'm sure there's more to this kid in the TV show, but man, this movie didn't do him justice. As for the Littles characters, the kids are okay, I guess. There's not much to them aside from being the most fearless. My favorite will probably be the cousin. He had some pretty funny moments. I also find it kind of interesting that the Littles would have to reveal themselves to the kid in order to get home. Remember, Littles aren't supposed to interact with humans for some reason. So this moment makes me wonder if they ever interacted with humans in the show. If not, then this must be a pretty big deal. Here Come the Littles is cute, I guess. Probably one of the better movies I talked about so far, but that's not saying much. Now it's time to talk about a highly beloved franchise about shape-shifting robots that defend the universe. That isn't called Transformers. From one obscure 80s franchise I never freaking heard of to another, the next movie is GoBots Battle of the Rock Lords. At first glance, you may think this looks like a cheap Transformers knockoff.
GoBots actually came first. Take that as you will.
Hanna-Barbera would end up doing a GoBots cartoon in 1984. When it comes to the movie, some fans have speculated this was supposed to be a TV special or a multi-episode arc, given the lack of improved animation in the movie.
Again though, this is nothing more than fan speculation.
The movie follows our main team of GoBots as they meet this mini rock robot,
Who request their help in defeating an evil group of rock robots.
Meanwhile, the evil GoBots, who I guess are the main villains of the show, also get involved and later team up with the evil rock robots. That's the best way I could sum up the plot. Once again, it's another basic good versus evil story you'd expect to see from an 80s cartoon. It is worth noting that this is the first Shut up, phone. It is worth noting that this is the first instance of a movie like this getting guest stars to play the new characters. You know, to really take advantage of the higher budget. The guest stars would include Telly Savalas, Roddy McDowall, and Margaret Kidder.
I forgot about Michael Nouri when initially recording this, so whoops.
I do wonder if the rock robots actually came back in the series and became reoccurring characters. I don't really have that many other takeaways from the movie. I kinda like some of the designs of the rock robots.
One of the GoBots, Scooter I think his name is, kinda sounds like Meatwad.
According to the scanners, it looks like a meteor.
Me and this Kurt, we've been through a lot together. I got me some fond memories.
The rock robots also have these, very peculiar weapons.
And that's all I have to say. GoBots Battle of the Rock Lords is the 80s toy commercial movie of all time. Moving on.
Going from one 80s franchise I never heard of, to another 80s franchise I never heard of, to another 80s franchise I may have heard of, I don't know. We have Heathcliff.
Heathcliff started off as a comic series written by George Gately that started publishing in 1973, and the comic series would eventually get an animated series in the 80s.
Which I guess was popular enough to warrant a theatrical movie. To my surprise, this is actually an anthology movie about Heathcliff telling his nephew 7 different stories, which are basically 7 episodes of the TV show.
Great.
Dude, I knew the 80s were really cheap when it came to producing cartoons, and I more than expected for some of these movies to just be TV specials repackaged into theatrical films, but I did not expect some of these movies to be this egregiously cheap. I did not expect instances where specific episodes that already aired on TV, mind you, at least to my knowledge they did, were just haphazardly stapled together and considered movies. This just feels like a giant scam. With that rant out of the way, how did I feel about the episodes shown within this movie? I will say, I wasn't expecting Heathcliff himself to be this much of an asshole at times. Mostly within the wraparound segments, where he's pretty much forcing his nephews to listen to his stories against their will. And we also see this in the very first segment, which involves Heathcliff going through an audition to be in a cat food commercial. Not only does he abuse his owner into auditioning, but when he's trying to scare off one of the cats auditioning, bro pulls out a whole fucking bulldozer. I enjoyed the first segment and the wraparound segments. The next 6 episodes aren't quite as good though. The second one involves another cat that looks like Heathcliff, and there's a crazy misunderstanding that comes from this.
He also uses his doppelganger to win a race or something, I don't know.
The third one is about Heathcliff stealing some meat from a shop, and when the owner chases after Heathcliff, he gets severely hurt. This would encourage Heathcliff to start being nice. Then these totally not Asian stereotype Siamese cats come to Heathcliff's town and start causing trouble. The fourth one involves Heathcliff going to military school. The fifth one is about Heathcliff dealing with the cat father. I really wonder what film they're referencing here. The sixth one is about Heathcliff preparing to wrestle this big cat. And the last one is about Heathcliff's father getting out of prison. I think my biggest problem with these segments is that they don't really play around with Heathcliff's douchiness all that much, which is why I enjoyed the first episode and the wraparound segments. As is, they're just kinda bland. Maybe most of the other episodes not shown in this movie are actually really good, I don't know. But I wouldn't say this movie was the best first exposure to the Heathcliff franchise. I'm just baffled that they thought something like this would be perfectly okay to release in theaters. Well, at least the next movie we're talking about actually earned a theatrical release. I've said this in a previous video, but I'm not very big into Transformers. I don't really know much about the franchise beyond the recent movie, and the Weird Al episode of Transformers Animated. Safe to say, I wasn't really expecting much from the 1986 movie. For starters, I will say, visually, it's one of the best movies so far. Pretty sad, to be honest. The backgrounds, the locations, and the characters are just drenched in detail, even if the animation isn't the best. It really feels like they actually had a decent movie budget to work with. Not just with the animation, but this is the second movie in this video that uses celebrities to voice the new characters. Orson Welles, Eric Idle, Judd Nelson, Leonard Nimoy, Robert Stack, and Lionel Stander.
Oh fuck, I forgot another one.
We also have our first movie to use licensed music. Most of it is pretty generic 80s rock, but one of the songs is actually Dare to Be Stupid by Weird Al Yankovic. That is based as fuck. When it comes to the story, once again, it's a mostly standard 80s action cartoon story. The film continues the ongoing war between the Autobots and Decepticons.
And apparently in this movie, the Decepticons have already conquered Cybertron. The Decepticons then attack an Autobot base on Earth. The attack will lead to Optimus and Megatron getting into a nasty fight, where they're both heavily injured.
The fight was so brutal that it ended up killing Optimus Prime. Hey, I said it was mostly a standard story. Meanwhile, Megatron is tossed out into space by the second-in-command of the Decepticons, Starscream. This would lead to Megatron meeting a huge planet-eating being called Galactus. This would lead to Megatron meeting a huge planet-eating being called Unicron, who changes Megatron into Galvatron and forces him to go after the Matrix of Leadership, some powerful thing the Autobots have that Optimus Prime gave to this blue dude whose name I don't remember. It seems rather ballsy for an 80s kid show to kill off one of its major characters. Optimus was killed off because Hasbro only really saw him, and the other characters, as disposable, outdated toys, and wanted to use his movie as a means of introducing a new wave of figures. Characters. Dude, the fact that higher-ups viewed Optimus fucking Prime, one of the most famous heroes in all of fiction, as some disposable action figure, really shows the priorities of TV executives back in the 80s. Prime's death must have been the Steve leaving Blue's Clues moment of the 80s, as this left a lot of kids upset, to the point where Optimus Prime was brought back to life in the series. That and the fact his replacement wasn't even that popular to begin with. Not much to say about the other characters. They're all just kind of going through the motions, having to stop the big bad guy from doing big bad guy stuff. There's this one Transformer who talks super fast.
Absolutely, positively, definitely. Nobody can get the job done faster than I can. Nobody.
It's interesting to see how Bumblebee doesn't do much, given he's a massive staple in the franchise. There's these dinosaur Transformers who speak in first person.
Me, Grimlock, not nice dino.
There's also a bit of swearing. That's something that completely caught me off guard.
It isn't even dented! Oh shit, what are we gonna do now?
And that's all I really have to say. The movie didn't really do all that well financially. Some say it was due to the controversy surrounding Optimus Prime's death, or the fact that it had to compete with Aliens and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. With how popular the franchise is, especially back then, it's really crazy to imagine a Transformers movie not doing well. Okay, too soon. Aside from all that, yeah, the movie didn't do a whole lot for me. Maybe I'd appreciate it more if I was an 80s kid who grew up loving the series. But as a 2010s kid who grew up loving Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, I didn't get a whole lot out of this. If I want to watch an animated Transformers movie, I think I'll just be sticking with Transformers 1.
I'm still pissed about that underperforming, by the way.
Okay, I need to get my mind off of that. Are we talking about the singing Chipmunks now? Alvin and the Chipmunks, another cartoon franchise I don't think needs much introduction.
You know, this is actually the first franchise in this video that I have a stronger personal connection with.
As a kid, I used to love the live-action movies, 3 was my favorite, and the CGI cartoon on Nickelodeon. Today we're talking about the 80s cartoon show, which might be the most famous iteration of these characters. More specifically, its theatrical movie, A Chipmunk Adventure. The film follows Alvin wanting to travel the world. He tries to go with Dave on a business trip to Europe, but Dave doesn't let him. When the Chipmunks are meeting up with the Chipettes, a pair of rich siblings, Klaus and Claudia, overhear Alvin and Brittany arguing about who could go around the world faster. The siblings see this as an opportunity to use the Chipmunks and Chipettes for a global diamond smuggling scheme. They set up a contest involving dolls of them, where each group would deposit their set of dolls to a certain location across the world, the dolls containing diamonds and cash in them. Honestly, I didn't really find the adventure all that exciting. Some of the locations don't do anything meaningful for the story, like the Chipmunks getting involved in this fiesta in Mexico. There's also a scene where the Chipmunks and Chipettes meet up in Europe. That doesn't really add anything besides a song number, and Dave briefly getting worried. There's also conflicts that are solved pretty easily, like Brittany and Jeanette encountering a bunch of cobras, but they manage to charm them through an Elvis song. There are even songs that play in scenes where our characters are in genuine danger,
ultimately undermining the tension of those scenes.
There's one where the Chipmunks are about to be sacrificed by this tribe that may or may not be offensive to a certain group of people, and the Chipmunks sing this song to distract the tribe, and a scene near the end where Klaus and Claudia take the Chipmunks and Chipettes away, and Dave and a cop chase after them. I understand this is a musical, this isn't Alvin and the Chipmunks movie after all, and I'm not entirely against songs playing during serious scenes, but the songs they play are these fun, cheery pop songs that really stick out like a sore thumb. When it comes to positives, visually this is another great one. Not only with these vibrant, detailed backgrounds, but this is easily some of the most fluid and expressive character animation I've seen in this video so far, which isn't saying much. I have been a bit hard on the songs, but I still think they're pretty catchy and fun to listen to. My favorite one is probably Off to See the World, a song that plays during a montage of the Chipmunks and Chipettes gathering a few dolls. Simon also has some pretty funny lines.
Alvin, land the balloon by the fountain. Like I said, in the tree.
Klaus and Claudia aren't great villains, they don't really do much throughout the film, but I did enjoy the beef Klaus had with Claudia's dog. Just like all these 80s movies I'm talking about, I wasn't expecting much from a Chipmunk adventure, but I was expecting a somewhat solid adventure movie, and sad to say, it didn't really deliver. I will say this though, I probably would have enjoyed this movie a hell of a lot more if Ian was in it. Just saying. Dude, if it wasn't for this one Blame It on Jorge video, I deadass would have never heard of Bravestar, or this movie in fact. Bravestar is another Filmation property that follows a Native American space cowboy named Marshall Bravestar, going on adventures across the galaxy with his horse sidekick. To my knowledge, the show or the toys it's based on weren't all that popular, and yet despite that, they still went forward with the theatrical movie for some reason. This movie is actually an origin story. At the beginning of the film, we get to see this sage character Supermaning Marshall Bravestar away, for some reason. And then from that point, we get to see how this Texas planet was discovered, how Bravestar came to said planet and met these evil cowboys who I think are the main villains of the show, and we get to see how he met the weird horse thing. The list goes on. There's also these underground creatures, and one of them's played by Charlie Adler, so that's cool, I guess. The animation's also a bit inconsistent. Sometimes it looks like your average 80s action cartoon, but other times it's actually pretty fluid. But yeah, aside from that, I said it before, I'll say it again, really not much to talk about with this movie. So that was the last 80s film for this video. I didn't expect much from these movies, and I didn't get much from these movies. Like I said, I knew 80s cartoons would be pretty cheap, but damn did some of these movies take it to the next level. Things should be looking up though, as the 90s was a huge turning point for American animation. Disney was going through its famous Renaissance period, beloved studios like Pixar and DreamWorks were first founded, releasing some of the very first 3D animated feature films, and TV animation will become much more creator-driven, with less shows meant to be extended toy commercials, and more shows that can be enjoyed by anyone of any age, leading to some of the most beloved and influential animated shows of all time. So let's start off this brand new era of animation by talking about a film based on a show that originated from the 60s. First film in the 90s marked the last project Hanna-Barbera had a major involvement in, the Jetsons movie. The original 60s run didn't last very long, but the show did come back in the 80s for 2 more seasons. A movie was being talked about since 1985, with ideas of making it live action. That would change as the distribution rights changed from Paramount to Universal. This is actually the first movie in this video that I've seen prior. It was back in 6th grade when I saw it on Netflix. I didn't really think much of it since, and after rewatching, I still kind of feel that way. The movie follows George Jetson getting a promotion at his job, where he'll be vice president of a sprocket factory. This means his family would have to move to the asteroid the factory is on. There have been instances where the sprocket factory would shut down due to malfunctions, leading the past 4 vice presidents to resign. George, however, is determined to find out what's wrong. I do kind of like how, despite being a bit of a klutz, George is still pretty dedicated to his job. A little too dedicated though, as he is a bit of a suck-up for his grouchy boss, Mr. Spacely. When George and the others eventually discover the problem being the factory was destroying the home of the furry creatures and lived underneath it, hence why the furry creatures had to cause the machines to malfunction, George actually stands up to Mr. Spacely. Seeing as George was also kind of a suck-up in the series, this moment must be a pretty big deal. In a lot of environmental stories, the humans fucking with the environment would often be entirely villainized. Spacely is still an asshole in this movie, but by the end, he makes a compromise with the creatures, letting them help in the factory, and reusing old sprockets so they won't have to do any more digging. It may seem odd that I kind of skipped all the way to the end of the movie, but when it comes to the rest of the film, there's not much to say. The other Jetsons don't get a whole lot to do, at least nothing that interesting. Jane, Rosie, and the dog Astro are just kind of there. Elroy befriends this robot kid who kind of exists. Judy falls in love with Captain Planet, but they don't do much of that either. It's a pretty generic romance. The movie also wants to explore how George's job is taking away time from his family, and we do see a bit of that in the opening, where George misses Elroy's spaceball game, and Judy has a date with a singer, but due to the family moving, she can't be with him. But after that, we don't really see how George's job affects the rest of the family in a negative light. After they move to the asteroid, they seem to be doing fine without him. There's this one scene near the end of the movie where Jane points this out to George, and I was just like, oh yeah, I forgot we were doing this. While I still can, I guess I should address a controversy with one of the voice actors. Most of the show's original voice actors came back to reprise their roles, but Judy's voice actor, while she recorded all her lines for the movie, and while she still got to voice smaller characters here and there, Judy's voice got replaced with Tiffany, because the higher-ups thought she'd attract more people. Safe to say, this friggin' sucks. And keep in mind, this was before celebrity voice acting became the norm for mainstream animated films. But on a more positive note, this is easily the best looking of the Hanna-Barbera films we discussed in this video. Not only is the animation more fluid, but this is also the first film in this video to use CGI. It doesn't look great per se, this is late 80s, early 90s CGI after all, but it also doesn't look too jarring with the 2D stuff. All in all, the Jetsons movie is fine. Like at best, it's a low 7 out of 10. The movie didn't really leave much of an impact when it came out, and it didn't leave much of an impact on me either. And more than likely, I'm never watching it again. Second film in the 90s, and our first Disney production. I'm sure most of us are vaguely familiar with DuckTales. I used to have a huge hyperfixation over the 2017 version, though it kinda died ever since the show ended. Today we're talking about the 87 show, which was one of the very first original Disney TVA productions, along with the likes of Gummy Bears, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, and Darkwing Duck. DuckTales was by far one of the most popular shows of this era of Disney TVA. The show would contain a few 5-part specials, but one of them was decided to be made into a movie. And that's how we got Treasure of the Lost Lamp. It follows Scrooge, the triplets, Webby, and Launchpad finding a bunch of lost treasure. They end up losing it to the main villain Morlock, but manage to bring home the lamp. The triplets and Webby soon discover that the lamp was a genie lamp, with the genie granting them each 3 wishes. It turns out that Morlock was mainly after the lamp, hence why he was after all that treasure in the opening. If Morlock gets the lamp, he can use his amulet he has to enhance the lamp's power and give him unlimited wishes. So they have to keep the genie away from Morlock. Going into this movie, I was warned ahead of time that just about all the characters were a lot more one-dimensional than the 2017 counterparts. And yeah, it's true. The triplets all have the same personality, Scrooge is a one-dimensional greedy asshole, Webby's a stereotypical cutesy girl, Mrs. Beakley doesn't do much, and Launchpad hasn't changed much actually. Because of this, despite a few humorous lines from Scrooge, it does kinda hinder the film for me. A majority of the film is just the kids making a bunch of wishes and having to hide the genie from Scrooge and Beakley. In other words, not much really happens. There is a moment near the end of the movie where Morlock's lackey Dijon gets a hold of the lamp and uses it to take all of Scrooge's fortune. They could have done something really interesting with Scrooge's character here, but like I said, it's near the end of the movie, so not much is really done with this. Not even Morlock was that memorable of a villain, aside from I guess his design and the fact he's voiced by Christopher Lloyd. The only character I actually kinda liked was the genie. He was pretty fun, endearing, and even well animated. Speaking of, yeah, this is a well animated film, though notably less refined than the bigger 2D animated works from Disney. Despite my feelings toward the movie, it is a shame it bombed the box office. There were plans for other DuckTales movies, along with movies based on the other Disney afternoon shows, but the only thing that really came out from this was the Goofy movie. Something I was originally going to give an entire segment to, but after doing a bit of research, I realized there was a lot that changed from the show, aside from the obvious time skip. So here I am just giving it a brief honorable mention. Very good movie, by the way. Anyway, yeah, I was sort of expecting Treasure of the Lost Lamp to not be that great, and lo and behold, it wasn't that great. Okay, so I know I didn't really have the strongest feelings towards a lot of these movies, but I assure you, from this point forward, I will have more to say about most of these movies. Anyway, let's talk about Batman the Animated Series. What was conceived as a tie-in to the Tim Burton Batman films, the show would often be regarded as the definitive interpretation of the Caped Crusader, and the starting point of the highly acclaimed DC animated universe. A unique art style, fantastic voice acting, redefining classic villains, and mature, often disturbing storytelling for a kid show at the time. I haven't really seen the show since middle school, so I may have to rewatch it at some point. An idea for a direct-to-video movie based on the series was brought up after the success of a Tiny Toons TV movie, How I Spent My Summer Vacation. For a while, ideas were being pitched around, some would end up being regular episodes of the series, but then an idea about giving Bruce some kind of love interest was brought up, and they went from there. Once the script was finished, Warner executives suggested giving the movie a theatrical release. This would put a lot of pressure on the crew to up their game on production. The film would release in 1993, on Christmas Day no less, but due to poor marketing, wouldn't do very well at the box office. Fortunately, it did gain a following via home media releases, and over the years is regarded as one of the absolute best Batman movies. Not just in animation, but in general. The film follows a brand new vigilante in Gotham, one who is much more ruthless than Batman. This will lead to certain people believing the new vigilante is Batman, seeing as nobody got a clear look at them. Things are made more complicated when an old college fiancé of Bruce's comes to visit Gotham, making Bruce question if his duties as Batman are preventing him from finding love. I'm not going to give a spoiler warning for every movie I talk about, but I'll make an exception here, seeing as this is a mystery story, so spoiler warning, I guess. First off, I will say this is a pretty well thought out mystery story. Really keeps you on your toes as everything unravels throughout the film. And almost everyone in Gotham believing Batman's a killer does add some decent tension to the story. I also love just about all the Phantasm scenes. I love the voice they gave him.
Buzz Bronski, your angel of death awaits.
And the deaths he causes are pretty fucking brutal. Phantasm's a character original to this movie, but there was a character similar to this in the comics, the Reaper. The Phantasm isn't really related to that guy though. He actually drew inspiration from the Ghost of Christmas Future from A Christmas Carol, and Spider-Man villain Mysterio. Throughout the film, we'd also get flashbacks to when Bruce was starting out as Batman. There's stuff like Bruce fighting crime without his famous Batman suit, and Bruce going to this future convention with Andrea, where there's a car that looks like the famous Batmobile. These flashbacks are also where Bruce's relationship with Andrea, the fiancée I mentioned earlier, is fleshed out. These scenes are pretty nice, and they do sell you on the relationship. And they also make the stuff that happens later on in the film more tragic. At some point in the movie, Bruce notices the Phantasm is going after a specific group of people in a mob. A mob that had Andrea's dad killed. If you can't put two and two together by now, Andrea turns out to be the Phantasm. This makes for a pretty interesting reflection of Batman. Bruce mainly fights crime to make sure no one goes through the same traumatic experience he did, whereas Andrea mainly wants to avenge her dad by killing the members of the mob that had him killed years ago. Bruce tries to talk her out of what she's doing, but Andrea is unfortunately too far gone. I love how by the end, Andrea doesn't realize what she did, and the last time we see her, she's on a boat leaving Gotham, her fate being entirely left up to interpretation. And despite seeing his former fiancée go down a dark path, Bruce still goes on with his life, continuing to protect Gotham as Batman. When it comes to the animation, there really isn't much of a notable upgrade. Though to be fair, while I haven't seen the show in a while, I do remember the animation already being pretty fluid. The only real upgrade in this movie is the shading. Joker's also in this movie, mainly because he was one of the members of the mob that killed Andrea's dad, obviously before he became the Clown Prince of Crime. When watching this movie, I really forgot how great this version of the Joker is. In every scene he's in, he is just immensely entertaining. It's really not hard to understand why Mark Hamill is considered such a definitive voice for the character. So yeah, I can safely say Batman Mask of the Phantasm is the first movie in this video I would put above a 6 out of 10. This may be the kind of film I appreciate more on another viewing, but as of now, I'm still pretty satisfied with what I watched. Batman Mask of the Phantasm is a very good movie, and I wouldn't mind watching it again. And here we have our first movie in this video to be based on an adult cartoon. Don't get your hopes up, there's not that many of them. I love Beavis and Butt-Head. It is by far one of my favorite shows of all time. I have been obsessed with this series since 7th grade when my late uncle first introduced me to it. Beavis and Butt-Head is like the perfect shut your brain off franchise. They're the kind of characters who are simple enough to be funny and entertaining in just about any situation. Even when they're just sitting and watching videos, it's an absolute delight to watch. When it came to the movie, creator Mike Judge initially refused an offer from Paramount, but eventually agreed to one in 1983. Warner Bros. Was initially going to contribute to the project, but once Viacom bought Paramount in 1994, Paramount would help produce the film. Our dim-witted duo wake up one morning to find their TV missing. They spend all day searching for it, but eventually stumble across Bruce Willis, who believes the two are hitmen he hired in a drunken state. Bruce Willis tasks the boys to do his wife in Vegas for 10 grand. By do, he means kill, but the boys think he means to have sex with her. Beavis and Butt-Head fly down to Vegas and meet the wife, played by Demi Moore, who manipulates him into going to DC so she could score with them. However, she uses this opportunity to send a deadly virus to DC by slipping it into Beavis' pants. This would ultimately make them the most wanted people in America, and throughout the journey are being chased down by the government. Beavis and Butt-Head is a very simple franchise, making Beavis and Butt-Head to America a very simple movie. The film doesn't have any kind of message, no overarching themes, Beavis and Butt-Head don't grow or change as characters by the end, it's just about the two going on a cross-country road trip while getting chased down by the government. More than likely, your enjoyment will depend on if you can tolerate Beavis and Butt-Head. Obviously, I can, so I like this movie. I enjoyed seeing the two cause a bit of havoc on the plane to Vegas, losing their bus to DC, and going on this bus full of nuns, the two dicking around the White House, and Beavis at one point making the greatest speech in all of cinema, about how they're seemingly never gonna score. If I were to complain, I guess I don't really like the new characters that much, mainly Bruce Willis and Demi Moore's characters. They really weren't that funny or interesting.
At least with the government agents, there is a bit of humor in the fact that they think Beavis and Butt-Head are the most dangerous men in America, when we as the audience know that couldn't be further from the truth.
This is another film where the animation really hasn't improved much from the series, with the only notable difference being shading, and more dynamic shot composition. Oh yeah, and there's also that famous hallucination scene too. I may not have had that much to say about this film, but I'll love Beavis and Butt-Head in just about anything they're in, so I enjoyed this movie. As for our next movie, well, it's a pretty special one. This film marks a pretty significant point in the history of not only this subgenre, but for the history of Western animated films as a whole. Rugrats, one of Nickelodeon's very first original cartoons alongside Ren and Stimpy and Doug. The shows that put the network on the map, helped kickstart the creator-driven era of 90s TV animation, and the beginning of a long-lasting legacy of Nicktoons to follow. As a kid, I watched a few classic Nicktoons in the 90s are all that block Teen Nick had, and I remember Rugrats being one of my favorites. Rugrats was initially planned to have a standard 65 episode run, but over time the show would become pretty popular. Did I say pretty popular? I meant to say a pop culture juggernaut. So obviously more seasons would be greenlit, but we'd also get a theatrical movie. Talks of a Rugrats movie goes far back to when the series first began. There were even talks of doing movies for Doug and Ren and Stimpy. In 1993, Viacom discussed making these movies with Fox. But like I said, Viacom would end up buying Paramount in 1994, so they would end up contributing to the Rugrats movie. This is the first movie since Transformers to actually have a huge lasting impact on the series, as it introduces a new namesake character, Tommy's new little brother, Dill Pickles. There was even an episode that directly led into the movie, The Family Tree, where Tommy's mom Dee Dee would announce her pregnancy. The film opens with a baby shower for Dill, and everyone rushing to the hospital where Dill is born. Dill turns out to be a bit of a handful though, constantly crying and leaving Dee Dee and Stu exhausted. Stu does encourage Tommy to be a responsible older brother, via a pep talk and giving him a locket. Tired of all the screaming, Phil and Lil opted to take Dill back to the hospital using a Reptar wagon Stu was about to send to a toy company, causing all the babies to drive out of the house and get lost in the woods. The babies believe there's a magical wizard that can help them get home, so they go out to search for him. Meanwhile, the adults discover their babies went missing and immediately go out to search for them, including Angelica, who's on her own separate search because the babies had her doll Cynthia. Dill is a pretty controversial character amongst fans of the show. It's said that after this movie, Dill is pretty much useless in most episodes. Another thing some people have pointed out, and this is something that I actually agree with, Dill's existence kinda goes against the entire point of Rugrats. The whole idea of the show is about seeing these babies who can talk amongst themselves, and getting to see how they interpret the world they recently just dropped into. So having Dill just be a regular ass baby who can't walk or talk does kinda go against the show's premise. I think it would have been way more interesting if Dill was actually able to talk like the babies, while still being even more naive to the world than they are. Dill aside, I do still like Tommy's arc throughout the film. Throughout the film, Tommy is trying to look out for Dill while he and the other babies try to find the wizard. This would cause a bit of tension between Tommy and the other babies, who believe Tommy is prioritizing Dill too much. Like how at one point Chucky falls into a river, and Tommy neglects to save him because of Dill. Phil and Lil especially just want nothing to do with Dill.
There's a bike trying to take Tommy's brother! So?
It's pretty easy to understand the frustration because they're babies, they don't really know any better. And the big third act fight they have feels natural because it's been building throughout the film. Then we have a scene where Tommy and Dill are alone at night, and they try hitting the hay. But Dill is being a bit of a nuisance. This, along with Tommy losing his friends, is kind of a breaking point for him. So he decides to have Dill be eaten by a bunch of circus monkeys that were chasing them earlier. As he's doing this though, he snaps back to reality, realizing that Dill is still his brother. The film's ultimate message is that you're not always going to get along with your relatives, but despite this, you should still always look out for them. And I think it's pretty well handled here. The Rugrats movie is also the first film in this video to be animated digitally instead of through traditional cell shading, and it does shine through with some pretty neat shot composition throughout the film. Rugrats in general was known for its weird shot composition, and some of that also shines through here. If I were to complain, the comedy could have been better. It's not super frequent, but there's quite a bit of toilet humor throughout the film, and it isn't all that funny. I do like this one joke where it's implied that Grandpa Lou accidentally caused Pearl Harbor. That's pretty funny. I also don't really like the songs all that much. They're pretty forgettable, and really don't add much to the narrative. But aside from all that, I think the Rugrats movie's pretty good. Nothing amazing per se, probably like a 6 out of 10 at worst, but Tommy's journey throughout the film definitely makes it worthwhile in my eyes. Anyway, here's the part where I talk about what I meant when I said this movie was special. With the popularity of the show, not only was this movie a massive hit, it was the first animated film not made by Disney to make over $100 million at the box office. Back in the day, this must have been a huge deal. Keep in mind, this was around the time where other mainstream studios either didn't exist or were just starting out. And this is around the time where mainstream film budgets were much cheaper. And we didn't have films frequently making $1 billion. It only seems natural for other companies to look at this film's success and try to replicate it by giving their own cartoon shows theatrical movies. And throughout the early 2000s, this is exactly what we would see. Case in point. While not being quite as popular as Rugrats or Ren and Stimpy, Doug still has a pretty important footnote in Nickelodeon's history. Of course, it's still one of the original 3 Nicktoons, but it still paved the way for more slice-of-life cartoons in the following years. The original Doug lasted for 52 episodes, ending its run in 1994. Then Disney came along and asked the creator, Jim Jenkins, if he wanted to do more seasons with them, and he said, yes. So Disney bought the franchise, and we got a new Doug continuation from it, premiering within Disney's new One Saturday Morning block. When it comes to the movie, it was intended to have a direct-to-video release, even being advertised as such. But once Disney noticed the success of the Rugrats movie, they decided at the last possible minute to release it in theaters. The film initially did okay, but that title's a big fucking lie. This was the last thing to ever come out of the Doug franchise. To this day, Disney still owns the rights to Doug, but they barely acknowledge it. A lot of people like to complain that Disney barely does anything with the Muppets, but at least every now and again they do something with them. I'm not super upset by this, but I still think it's a bit depressing. Okay, I've gotten a bit off track. Let's talk about the movie. The film is actually the culmination of an arc throughout the Disney Doug show, involving Doug and Skeeter finding a monster in Lucky Duck Lake. And in this movie, we actually get to see the monster. It turns out the monster's an innocent creature though, so Doug and Skeeter befriend it, but like a lot of stories where a kid discovers some crazy supernatural shit, they have to hide the crazy supernatural shit from everybody else. Aside from their next door neighbor, Mr. Dink, and his wife who's also the mayor. And there's also generic evil business guy number 50,001 who wants to hunt the monster down for profit. While that's going on, there's a Valentine's Day dance coming up at Doug's school, and Doug wants to plan said dance with his crush Patty Mayonnaise, but ultimately loses the position to a guy named Guy. Yeah, this is a pretty bland story. If you've seen the kind of story where a kid has to hide a supernatural thing from everyone else, then I'm sure you've seen this movie before. The funny thing is, the main villain is also a reoccurring side character in the show, so he couldn't have been that much of a villain, right? I haven't seen the original Doug in a while, and I haven't seen anything from the Disney version, but isn't he supposed to be like a decent guy? So do fans think it's jarring that this guy is all of a sudden an asshole? I do know that Guy, a character exclusive to the Disney seasons, is barely an asshole in the show, so I guess that must be jarring for people. Like I said, Doug and Skeeter show the monster to their neighbor, Mr. Dink, who's also the husband of the mayor, and the mayor doesn't do anything about the evil rich guy coming after the monster. Patty's also kind of a bitch in this movie. There's a scene where Doug is about to unveil the monster to this camera crew, but then it's revealed the camera crew is actually a trap from the rich guy. So before Doug is about to unveil Herman, he leaves. And this would just make Patty believe that Doug is lying all of a sudden. Patty does have every right to feel suspicious of what Doug did, but they've been friends for a while at this point. It's just really jarring that Patty would fully believe that Doug was lying. With this being produced as a direct-to-video movie in mind, aside from the shading, the animation really isn't that impressive. Anyway, the only thing I could say I liked about this movie was this one joke.
Telling scary stories? Come on, Mr. Funny. Holler if you want me to check under the bed for monsters. No!
Doug's only movie is not great, and it's sad that this is the note the Doug franchise went out on. But like I said, the film did okay at the box office, and I guess this inspired Disney to make a couple more movies based on their cartoons. More on those later, though. Back in 7th grade, I was obsessed with South Park. I watched the show frequently, I played the crap out of Fractured But Whole, and I listened to the movie songs constantly. I've practically memorized them all. Even today, I'd still consider South Park to be one of my favorite shows. Speaking of the movie, the film follows the 4 boys sneaking into an R-rated movie. Terrence and Phillip asks a fire. They end up learning a lot of bad language from the movie, much to their parents' dismay. Kyle's mom, Sheila, is especially outraged. Things only get worse and Kenny ends up dying after imitating something he saw in the movie. This would make Sheila end up declaring war on all of Canada, the country that produces Terrence and Phillip. To make matters even worse, Satan wants to use the execution of Terrence and Phillip to conquer Earth. So it's up to the boys to start an alliance of their own to stop Sheila. Back when South Park first came out, there was a huge controversy surrounding the show, mainly with kids watching it and learning all the bad language and stuff. And parents, instead of monitoring what their kids watch, decided to just blame the show itself for corrupting their kids. There was even a season 1 episode about this, where Sheila and this mob of parents protest outside the studio that makes Terrence and Phillip. Of course, this episode would also inspire the movie. There's definitely humor in the fact that Sheila's going to war with an entire country over a TV show, but with the controversy in mind, it just makes it all the more insightful. Especially since we're still facing stuff like this today. The film's ultimate message is that parents should take responsibility for what their kids watch, while also making sure they don't imitate everything they see on TV. Great message aside, the film is still pretty damn funny. My favorite joke has to be the one involving Bill Gates. That shit was hilarious. The movie also gives each of the 4 boys their own little stories throughout the film. My least favorite's probably Stan's story, which involves him wanting to get with his crush from the series, Wendy, but she's currently dating a super political kid named Gregory. There's nothing too bad about the story, it's just a pretty generic guy wants to get with the girl story, but it is a major reason for the boys to start their resistance against Sheila. So I guess there's that. Then there's Cartman's story, which involves him getting a chip inside of his head that shocks him every time he's about to swear. This little subplot is mainly used for jokes, but it does give Cartman this really badass moment at the finale. Kyle's story involves him gaining the courage to stand up to his mom. Not a whole lot of interesting stuff comes from this, but I do really love the part where he eventually does stand up to Sheila. For a while, Kenny dying in every episode was a huge staple of South Park, so with this movie coming out after season 3, it only makes sense to make that a major plot point in the film. Basically, Kenny goes to hell, and has to talk Satan out of an emotionally abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein. Kenny's story is mainly just there to boost Satan's story, but I don't really mind too much. Satan's arc is still really great, and by the end, Kenny does still get a satisfying send-off. Of course, I can't talk about this movie without bringing up the songs. The songs are great. Like I said, I used to listen to them a lot back in middle school, and I pretty much memorized all of them by heart. Blame Canada, What Would Brian Boitano Do, La Resistance, Up There, I Can Change. Not only are they great to listen to, but just about all of them progress the story in some way. I don't really have too much to say about the animation. It hasn't really improved that much from the show, but though I will give it a pass given that South Park has a very distinct art style. The film does noticeably look less saturated than the show, and there is a bit of CGI used here and there. While this movie definitely holds up as a movie, I hear some people say that it doesn't really hold up that well as a South Park movie. Most fans agree that South Park didn't really find its footing until after season 3. Even the creators, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, agree with this sentiment. And ever since then, the show has changed a lot, with new fan favorite characters, evolution of old characters, and improved animation. But aside from that, South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is a great watch from beginning to end, and easily one of my favorite things to come out of the South Park franchise. We may not get another South Park movie anytime soon, but hey, at least we still have this film to come back to every now and again. This film may not have everything that made South Park a beloved show, but it's still a solid celebration of the show's early years, while also being a great movie on its own.
Hey!
Huh? Oh, FunnyHappyStudios, what are you doing here?
Didn't you say you wanted guest stars for this video?
Oh yeah, I knew I was forgetting something. So, you wanted to talk about the South Park movie, right?
Yes I did.
Cool.
The South Park movie is great. My family and I saw this film back in 2023 during our South Park marathon, and we were howling with laughter. It's easily the funniest film I had seen in a while with a very insane plot. I love how Sheila basically reminds the audience why this big execution is happening, and that always brings a chuckle out of me. And it's hilarious but accurate how some parents will resort to insane measures just to avoid taking the blame. Speaking of blame, Blame Canada is the best song and should have gotten that Oscar. I'm still mad over that. Kyle's Mom's a Big Fat Bee is absolute comedy gold that makes me smile every time I hear it. And for Up There, it's such a neat detail that the song sung by Satan himself is the only musical number that doesn't have any swear words. Also, it's probably the second best song in the movie, and I love the vocal delivery and the reference to Part of Your World from The Little Mermaid. Satan probably has the best character development here, and it's so satisfying seeing him stand up to Saddam Hussein. Good for him, man. I really hope Satan doesn't end up dating another abusive dictator. So with all those praises, I guess this movie is perfect, right?
I don't think so.
As much as I like this film and how funny and timeless it is, I do have some gripes. For starters, Stan is given the most boring role in the entire movie. They thrust him into the cliche, main character's love interest is hanging out with another boy, and he must prove himself. Maybe I would have let it slide if the new kid was interesting, but he's extremely irritating, hijacks the boy's plan on La Resistance, and never appears in the show again. I hate him so bad, and I hope a mountain lion eats him. My last nitpick is most of the celebrity cameos are gags. Some are okay, but nearly all of them are just weird or kill the tone. I think the funniest is the Bill Gates joke, but that's about it. Overall, the movie has 10 out of 10 comedy, there's a very useful message within the already great story, and it perfectly captures the spirit of the show. Part of me thinks this would have been a good way to conclude the South Park franchise, but at the end of the day, I'm happy this show is still going on. If you like raunchy humor and meta storytelling on media censorship, please give this a watch. 9 out of 10.
So yeah, much like 90s TV animation as a whole, this era was a huge improvement over the 80s. Like I said, the success of the first Rugrats movie would lead to a pretty significant rise of cartoon movies in the early 2000s, with every company wanting a piece of that Rugrat movie pie. And how did this era go? Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. With the historic success of the first Rugrats movie, it only seemed natural to do a sequel. And yeah, that paid off. A major part of the show was Chucky being the son of an only father, his mother dying when he was a younger baby. Much like the first movie, there was also an episode that directly tied into this movie, a 3-part special called Acorn Nuts and Diaper Butts. The special having a plot where Chucky's father, Chaz, looks for a new girlfriend. If the title of the movie didn't give it away already, the babies and their parents take a trip to the North Pole. The reason being so Stu can fix up a giant Reptar animatronic he made for a Disneyland-esque theme park called Euro Reptarland. Reptar being this fictional Godzilla parody the babies look up to. While that's going on, the head of Euro Reptarland, Coca LaBouche, wants to marry Chaz so she can prove to the head of the Reptar company she cares about kids, when in actuality, she hates them. I was thoroughly invested in Chucky's story. The film does have some pretty decent emotional moments about him wanting a new mom. He also has a little arc about bravery, seeing as he's the coward of the main babies. It's a decent arc and all, but given the kind of show Rugrats is, I'm not sure if it really stuck for the rest of the series. Oh, speaking of sticking for the rest of the series, this movie also introduces new namesake characters to the series. An employee at Euro Reptarland, Kira, and her daughter Kimmy, along with a poodle that Tommy's dog Spike meets. I don't really care for Kira or Kimmy that much. They don't have much chemistry with Chucky or Chaz, so by the end where Chaz decides to marry Kira, I just don't really feel much. Coco LaBouche is a decent antagonist, adding a bit of tension to the story, but is hammy enough to not be too threatening. I also think the location of Euro Reptarland is pretty fun. I love this cool looking tsunami elevator, and there's even some in-universe lore for Reptar with this princess character. That's pretty neat. I also enjoyed the climax where all the babies are inside the giant Reptar animatronic, even if it's a bit much for a more grounded show like Rugrats. That and the CGI in the mech blends in pretty well with the 2D assets. Most fans I've heard from say that this movie's better than the first one, and there are some things I prefer like the setting. I just think the relationship between Tommy and Dill was handled better in that movie, as opposed to the relationship between Chucky, Chaz, Kira, and Kimmy in this movie. But this is just my opinion. At the end of the day, I still think Rugrats in Paris is a solid watch, and definitely a lot better than the last Rugrats movie we'll talk about soon. I haven't really watched much of Recess, to be honest. I know the basic concept of it being about the school where the kids have their own little society with certain groups and famous people, but all I've really seen from it were bits and pieces of the show. I remember first being exposed to the franchise through one of the direct-to-video anthology specials that was on Netflix when I was a kid. I am aware the show was pretty popular when it was airing. When it came time to end the show, they wanted to wrap the show up with a TV movie, but presumably due to the Rugrats movie, it was put in theaters at the last minute. And aside from the anthology specials I mentioned earlier, and a Lilo and Stitch crossover episode, this was pretty much the last thing to come out of the Recess franchise. If the film's title didn't give it away, this film takes place during summer vacation. Problem is, all of TJ's friends are going off to summer camp to prepare for their futures as adults. This of course leaves TJ pretty bummed out. One day though, he discovers some strange shit going on at 3rd Street School, and calls his friends back to investigate what's going on. It turns out that James Woods wants to use the machine to change the rotation of the Earth and bring it into another ice age, effectively ending summer vacation once and for all. Now, this does seem like a pretty outlandish plot, especially when Recess is supposed to be a slice-of-life franchise. And much like the Doug movie and The Monster, it does feel like a pretty cheap means of adding stakes for a movie. With that said though, Recess was always a show about kids rebelling against adults. So having a plot where this guy wants to get rid of summer vacation does sort of fit thematically, if that makes sense. Outlandish plot aside, I still had a bit of fun with this movie. The main 6, no not those guys, don't really go through any notable arcs. There is a theme of cherishing the time you have as a kid, but they don't really do a lot with that, as well as Gus becoming more confident by the end, I guess. And I'm sure they are written better in the series, but they're still somewhat endearing. Their traits from the show carry over. TJ's the determined leader, Mikey's the gentle giant, Spindley's the tough one, Vince is the sports guy, Gus is the timid one, and Gretchen is the brains. And they definitely sell you on their friendship. My favorite scene by far is where they're all in TJ's treehouse to spy on the school, and they're all just kind of hanging out and reminiscing. It's really sweet. Some of the side characters in the show also get a bit of attention here, like these token Valley girls called the Ashleys, these Digger twins, the kindergartners, the snitch Randall, and the playground monitor Miss Finster. Even Principal Prickly has some personal connections with the villain, as well as a great speech to TJ about how he misses being a kid. Speaking of the villain, James Woods aside, he's still pretty fun. I really like him.
I am going to get rid of summer vacation. You feed! Feed? Huh? You try to help people? That's the thanks you get.
It was also pretty fun seeing all these characters come together to save the day in the climax, and it especially could be really rewarding for fans of the show. If I were to list some problems, like I said earlier, the theme of cherishing your childhood doesn't really come up that much, and the animation once again isn't theatrical movie quality. But aside from that, Recess School's Out wasn't that bad. It's not amazing, but I had a bit of fun with it. And with what I've been hearing about the show, I definitely want to check it out sometime. Hey Arnold, another beloved Nicktoon from the 90s that I remember watching a bit of as a kid. I think this may have been the first Nicktoon to tell more mature stories every so often. Like one episode could be about Arnold dreaming about being in an opera, and another one could be about child neglect. The show is popular, and from what I know, was treated pretty well by Nickelodeon. But then the movie kind of killed the series. Okay, if you know Hey Arnold, you should be familiar with the story. But to anyone who's new to this, creator Craig Bartlett planned 2 movies to the series. One TV movie and one theatrical movie. The TV movie would have been the 100th episode of the series. It would have revolved around Arnold's neighborhood being destroyed, and him having to save it, as the original title suggests. The theatrical movie would have been the series finale, and had Arnold going on an adventure in the jungle to find his long-lost parents. With how successful the first Rugrats movie was though, Nickelodeon had other plans. They gave Craig a bit of extra budget for Arnold Saves the Neighborhood to put it in theaters, and if it did well, they greenlit the Jungle movie. So Hey Arnold the movie, yeah, it also had a new title, released in theaters in summer of 2002, which was pretty damn crowded by the way. And it didn't do that great, so the Jungle movie didn't get made, and the Hey Arnold show would end on a cliffhanger, staying like that until 2017. It's not like this film is all that well regarded by fans anyway. Like I said, the film centers around Arnold's neighborhood being destroyed, so generic evil businessman number 50,000 can replace it with a mall. Arnold tries to do what he does best, and inspires the other residents of his neighborhood to fight back. After a few attempts though, it doesn't really work. But then one night, Arnold's grandpa tells him a story about this tomato war, something that happened within the neighborhood years ago, proving the place is some kind of national landmark. So now it's up to Arnold and Gerald to find the document about this tomato war, and they do this by becoming spies. Yep, this is another movie based on a slice of life cartoon that adds in some outlandish concept for the sake of making it feel bigger. The thing is, Arnold's neighborhood being destroyed, while definitely high in stakes, is still a grounded conflict for this universe. It really is just the spy stuff that feels out of place. It's not even that it's all bad. When you don't connect it to the show too much, there are still some decent scenes. Like when Arnold and Gerald had to get a key off this guy's neck. There is some pretty decent tension here. And I guess there is some fun to be had with this big bus chase near the end. But other than that, yeah, the spy stuff is a bit generic. Kinda wish the film was solely about Arnold inspiring the other neighborhood folks to fight back against Shek, the dude destroying the neighborhood. That way we could actually spend some friggin' time in the neighborhood. Yeah, I never mentioned this, but fans of the show could obviously feel the stakes of the situation, but they did not do a good job reestablishing this world for newcomers. For crying out loud, the conflict is introduced barely 10 minutes into this thing. We do get like 2 scenes of characters reminiscing on their neighborhood, but that's really it. Hey Arnold is a show with a pretty big cast of side characters, with a lot of episodes revolving around them. We do get a subplot with Grandpa Phil and the residents of the boarding house he runs, planting bombs to stop the bulldozers from destroying their neighborhood, but they don't do a lot with that. We also have Helga's dad in cahoots with Shek, but again, not much comes from that. I did somewhat enjoy the subplot where Grandma Gertie gets arrested and has to break out of jail, mainly because I love the crazy old person trope, and Gertie is a pretty fun character to follow. But aside from that, the other characters like Rhonda, Eugene, Phoebe, Harold, Torvald, Iggy, okay maybe not him, Chocolate Boy, Curly, Olga, Gerald's family, the Jolly Ollie Man, Arnold's teacher, all those guys are either not in the movie or completely shafted within it. But let's get back to Helga real quick. Helga's kind of a fan favorite character. She's a tough, snarky kid with a pretty rough home life, and deep down she has a massive crush on Arnold. And in the movie, all that stuff stays true. Helga ends up helping Arnold and Gerald out by putting on this persona called Deep Voice and calling them with information every now and again, thanks to her dad working with the villain, like I said earlier. Near the end of the movie, her shtick is revealed to Arnold, and this is the moment Helga confesses her love to Arnold. You'd think this would be a pretty big moment for the series, but by the end it just kinda gets brushed off. So it just begs the question, what was the point of this whole arc? Whatever, the animation also wasn't that great. It's really easy to tell this is supposed to be a TV movie. Aside from this one bit where they parody Ghost Rider, the animation's barely seen any improvements. I think this is also pointed out before, but the only characters with proper shading are Arnold, Gerald, Helga, and Shek. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If there's anything else I did like, there's this one part where Arnold and Gerald have to get information about the document, and they meet Christopher Lloyd. I actually like this character, he's pretty funny. Especially with how he just casually has a bunch of dead bodies everywhere in his home. So yeah, hair on the movie is far from terrible, but it's also not very good. Even if this was just a TV movie, if it was gonna have the exact same story as this, I still don't think it would have been that great. At best, it's a relatively harmless spy film for kids. At worst, it's painfully mediocre, and it doesn't do the show it's based on much justice. Fun fact, the next movie we're talking about actually released the very next week after the Hey Arnold movie. Take that as you will. Much like Nickelodeon, I was a kid who discovered a bunch of older Cartoon Network shows. One of my absolute favorites of these was the Powerpuff Girls. The show was one of the very first Cartoon Network originals. It helped it to become more than just a network that aired Great Babe reruns. Powerpuff Girls was by far one of the most, if not the most popular show on the network during its run. With how huge the show was, a Powerpuff Girls movie should have been an easy hit, right?
No.
Like I said, this came out a week after Hey Arnold, which is already during a pretty busy summer for movies. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the film's marketing also wasn't that great, and there wasn't a whole lot of late night screenings. The failure of this movie is also a factor to why we barely see any theatrical movies based on Cartoon Network shows. Honestly, I could see an alternate timeline where the movie actually did well. And not only would we have gotten more Powerpuff Girls movies, but movies based on other Cartoon Network shows. I just know for a fact that My Gym Partner is a Monkey movie would have been so peak. Let's get back to the Cartoon Network movie we did actually get though. I'm sure we're all familiar with the show's famous intro, that showcases how Professor Utonium made the girls. This movie's pretty much everything that happens immediately after that point. This is where we see how the girls got accustomed to Townsville, and how they started fighting crime. Basically, after the girls destroy some of the town thanks to their powers, unintentionally of course as they were just playing tag, they become public enemy number 1. Even the professor gets arrested for a brief period. Later, the girls stumble upon their main adversary in the series, Mojo Jojo, who manipulates them into helping take over Townsville with these mutated monkeys. Some people are disappointed with the fact this movie's a prequel, and I can kinda see where they're coming from. Prequels and origin stories can be a bit of a slow burn, especially for well-established franchises like the Powerpuff Girls, and it leaves very little room to have nods to the show for fans. So when it came to wanting to please the newcomers, they pretty much just took the easy way out. So the crew behind this movie wanted it to be an action film and a subtle character study at the same time. I'm kinda mixed on this choice. On one hand, Powerpuff Girls is no stranger to darker stories like Speed Demon and Twisted Sister, but on the other hand, I'm not really a fan of how some things are executed. For example, the townspeople here are kinda mean. I understand they're fearful of the girls' powers, but I don't know, they were a lot friendlier in the show. I'm also not a fan of how they handle the main villain, Mojo Jojo. Before we get to that, I want to talk a bit about the Season 1 episode, Mr. Mojo's Rising. In this episode, it's revealed that Mojo Jojo used to be the professor's lab monkey. And when the professor was working on the girls, Mojo pushed the professor, and that's what caused the chemical X to get added in by accident, meaning that Mojo inadvertently created the Powerpuff Girls. And wouldn't you know it, this is actually a major plot point in the movie. I understand them wanting to show parallels between the girls and Mojo, how they were both sort of created by the professor's chemical X, and how the girls went on to be heroes while Mojo went on to be a villain, but I don't know, I feel like they made Mojo a little too serious here. Aside from maybe some instances in the finale, he doesn't really get that many goofy moments. For crying out loud, this is the same dude who makes these big monologues about eggs.
For a nutritious breakfast, 2 eggs is the minimum requirement, and I have but 1, which is one shy of 2, and it is 2 that I need.
Now, I'm not saying they couldn't tell a serious story, but I do think the silly and serious stuff in this movie is a bit unbalanced, going a bit too far in the serious category. There are still things I did like about this movie, though. I enjoyed the first 10 minutes, where the girls and the professor are just bonding. That's some really sweet stuff. The third act is also a lot of fun, simply because it's just a fun action scene. And I loved seeing all the monkeys Mojo used to take over Townsville turning against him, and having their own little names and gadgets is by far my favorite scene in the movie. Lastly, while the animation is about on par with the show, its real strengths are with the coloring and shot composition, with lots of these bold, dark colors and huge feeling shots. This movie was also the first to adapt the style of the last 2 seasons, with stuff like the girls' heads being bigger, Mojo having pointy ears, and this weird pupil thing going on with some of the characters. Pretty fitting since this is the last time series creator Craig McCracken would be heavily involved with the main show, and before he'd fully focus on his next series, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. The Powerpuff Girls movie is a bit of a mixed bag in my eyes. It has a few things I really liked about it, and other things I think could have been handled better. With a better balanced tone, and maybe without the origin story stuff, this movie really could have been something. But as is, I don't think I'm going to be revisiting it anytime soon.
Hey man.
Oh hi, Smoke the Horsehog. Do you want to talk a bit about the Powerpuff Girls movie?
I sure would.
Cool.
Do what, monkey boing.
The Powerpuff Girls movie is a motherfucking masterpiece, and I will not hear otherwise. Right from the get-go, while including characters like Fuzzy Lumpkins and the Gangrene Gang, or a lot more ferocious than I remember them being in the cartoon, this film establishes Townsville as the crime-infested central it is. And just look at the lighting at this opening shot. Unlike the theatrical cartoon adaptations done beforehand, this film didn't put that emphasis on overly detailing the backgrounds, while the characters were given less detail and left it at that. No, it put the emphasis on how the characters look with different lighting in mind. Behind flames and explosions, right underneath store lights, even in just the shadows of the dark sky. To make these characters feel like they're within this painted, three-dimensional space. And this isn't to mention this metal ball right here, which is a definite standout amongst this movie's CGI. And all of this is on top of just how pleasing this movie is to look at from a 2D perspective.
They are little freaks, aren't they?
This is great and all, of course, but the real reason I love this movie is how every narrative aspect, that isn't a gag that is, helps the film flow together as seamlessly as possible. And it all ties into the film's thematic parallels through its main characters. On one hand, JoJo and Utonium's relationship isn't all that fleshed out, and seeing that this is an origin story for the girls specifically, we don't get to see firsthand how JoJo is treated. At the same time, just looking at his situation is enough to get a general idea. He's living in a cardboard box, having to hide his expanded brain matter in a paper bag. The implications are just as JoJo claims, ploy or not. Yet, he doesn't come into play until the news of the girls finally comes around. Big brain or not, he's living in a box and hiding from the public. This isn't the only reason why he targets the girls, though. He wouldn't target the girls if they were not born to Utonium. And no Utonium would mean no Chemical X. The whole reason the girls got their powers and JoJo got his expanded brain. And he especially wouldn't threaten Utonium's life in the finale if this shared background, even though he and Utonium's partnership severing was his own fault through the destruction he caused and choosing to run away. He felt rejected, and so did the girls. And both times, it was not the professor's fault. The Powerpuffs and JoJo are not just societal rejects with superpowers that no one understands. They were rejected for both aspects about them that they could control, the destruction they caused without thinking, and that they couldn't control, their physical appearances. Without all this, JoJo's means of convincing the girls to help him, and his paralleled final speech, would not have been as effective as it is.
None of them will ever understand you as I can.
But my pain is not for you to understand. All we have to do is work together. Your powers are great. You just gotta believe in yourself.
Same with the quotes he takes from Utonium when complimenting and gaslighting them.
They do not know that it is their saviors they are speaking to.
People don't really understand just how special you girls are yet.
This is what sets Mojo Jojo and the Powerpuff Girls apart. Intentionality. The movie makes no secret that JoJo is the villain, often letting out that shark tooth grin whenever hiding his face with the girls. to the point where he bludgeons the girls with the not suspicious at all plan of the
help the town to make it a better place machine, help the town to make it a better place machine, help the town and make it a better place.
And I say bludgeon, because unlike the girls who listen to and are trusting of the authority of others, and thus actively listen to responses that aren't from each other, JoJo lets it all out without taking no for an answer. And that's on top of his verbose wordage. Even the signs of empathy he has for his fellow primates, judging from his facial expressions during the zoo visit, ultimately mean nothing. If these empathetic moments meant anything other than self-pity, he wouldn't lose it. Definitely wouldn't lose it once his simian army took advantage of their own upgraded noggins. JoJo sympathizes with his kind, only to turn on them for his own gain. The girls sympathize with their fellow humans, only turning their backs when those that once cared abandoned them or broke away from their own empathy. If they had empathy for the girls to begin with. JoJo's every move is an intentional misguidance, or brought upon destruction, self-serving first and foremost. The girls aren't aware of the destruction they cause, until it's flashed in their faces. On the subject, let's talk about the girls and their brain functionality. They were born from a bowl of ingredients, and came out fully capable of talking and thinking almost immediately. And yet, when they head off to school, they don't even know what school is, nor do they get human-made activities like tag. I'd say for all their superior intellect to understand human empathy, as well as their own powers, that's all they really know. When these girls are cutting open windows with their laser eyes, without listening to their father, no less, it doesn't seem like a stretch that they'd be so focused on tag that almost any property damage would be neglected. Human empathy was understood. But that didn't translate to empathy towards property or belongings. Did I mention how funny this movie is? It's definitely not the funniest thing I've watched, not by far. The comedy is the cherry on top of an already really enjoyable film. Just about every part of the Mojo Ape scene is such an overly creative, hilarious piece of work. And with how many names and forms of weaponry they came up with, and it's all paired with Mojo's snide comments.
Oh, that's classy.
If there is one thing I'd say could be better, it'd probably be giving Bubbles more to do on her own accord. At least when compared to Buttercup and Blossom's contributions to the action narrative. Not that I want to hear her join in the argument, it just highlights the impact of her actions. This is an absolute recommendation for me, whether you're a Powerpuff Girls fan or not. Watch this as soon as you are able. Back to you, Fadmaster.
Do it, monkey, boing.
Now, I've made it perfectly clear that Rugrats used to be a pop culture sensation. But let's talk about the studio behind the series for a bit, Klasky Subo. Them and Nickelodeon had a pretty strong partnership back in the 90s and early 2000s, producing 5 other shows for the network along with Rugrats. There was the Rugrats spin-off, All Grown Up, but then there was Our Real Monsters, Wild Thornberries, Rocket Power, and As Told by Ginger. None of these shows were anywhere near as successful as Rugrats, but they were still pretty popular. Okay, I'm not sure if As Told by Ginger was that big of a hit, but I've heard great things about it. This especially applies to Wild Thornberries, a show centering around a family who travel the world as a dad hosts a nature show, and the youngest daughter Eliza has the magical power to talk to animals. I barely watched that much of the series, but wouldn't you know it, the film's opening is actually a recreation of the show's intro. I really like this. It's a nice little treat for fans, and it also explains to newcomers what the show is about. One day Eliza sneaks off to hang out with some cheetah cubs. All of a sudden one of the cheetah cubs gets captured by hunters. The remaining Thornberries come to Eliza's aid, and that's when the parents find out that Eliza was constantly sneaking off to see other animals. The grandma, who's also there, suggests they take Eliza to a boarding school in London as a punishment. To anyone who's actually seen the show, were there any episodes that took place in suburban settings? Because this must be a pretty big thing for the series. It's the shame Eliza is only in boarding school for like 10 minutes, so it really doesn't add much to the movie. The only takeaway I got from these scenes were Eliza bonding with the other girls with her telling them about her adventures. Once Eliza goes back to Africa, not much interesting happens with her, and all that really happens is her meeting a few other animals. The other Thornberries are made aware of Eliza leaving the boarding school, so Eliza's parents and grandparents go out to search for her. Meanwhile, Eliza's older sister, Debbie, goes out to search for her on her own. While Debbie's out searching, she befriends this tribal dude, and credit where credit is due, their friendship is pretty nice. Eliza then meets up with these animal experts she met earlier in the film. And yeah, I'm gonna cut right to it, they're the villains of the movie. And they also capture Tally. And they also plot to kill a herd of elephants with an electric fence. Aside from that, yeah, these two are pretty boring. They kinda have an issue similar to 2010's Disney villains, where the twist is all they really have going for them.
Their motivation is pretty simple: kill a bunch of elephants to get their ivory. And I wouldn't mind this if they were at least fun or memorable or scary, but they really aren't. Okay, so Debbie shows up, and one of the hunters is about to throw her off a cliff. And it's here where Eliza's forced to tell him that she can talk to animals, causing her powers to be taken away. Now this is where the movie really starts to pick up steam. So after that, Eliza, Debbie, Darwin, and Donnie escape the poulters. Oh shit, I forgot to talk about Darwin. So Darwin is Eliza's monkey friend, and he barely has anything interesting to do with this movie. He's only really here because he kinda has to be. Eventually, they find the herd of elephants, but the electric fence is already set. After some encouragement from her older sister, which was pretty nice to see, Eliza is motivated to try and save the elephants. And she eventually does so. Oh yeah, not only does Eliza get her powers back, but Debbie still knows a secret, and that carries into the show, so that's pretty cool. The Wild Thornberries movie is fine, I guess. There are some interesting things here, like the boarding school and Tally, but they really don't do much with those. And as much as I like what they did with Eliza losing her powers, it did feel a little tacked on. Honestly, if I ever get down to watching the series someday, it'll probably be because of Nigel. He's pretty funny in this movie.
This will be the highlight of my young life. That's the spirit, poodles. Have you completely lost your ability to recognize sarcasm? I'm not sure I ever had it, Deborah.
Anyway, believe it or not, this wouldn't end up being the last time we saw the Wild Thornberries on the silver screen. Here we are at our last Rugrats movie, as well as one of the last major things to come out of the Rugrats franchise for a while. Around this movie's release, Rugrats was kind of falling off. Fans say the writing of the newer seasons took a nosedive, and new shows like SpongeBob, Fairly OddParents, Jimmy Neutron, and even its spin-off All Grown Up were starting to become huge. Like I said, both Rugrats and Wild Thornberries were produced under the same animation studio, Glass-T-Subo, and they were the two most popular shows they've done. And I guess someone at Nickelodeon really wanted to see Susie Carmichael and Donnie interact, so they decided to do a crossover between the two shows. Rugrats Meet the Wild Thornberries was originally going to be a TV movie, but due to positive test screenings, it was put in theaters with a new title. Rugrats Go Wild was still a hit, but it ended up being the lowest grossing Rugrats movie, further cementing the fact that the hype for Rugrats was pretty much over. The film follows the babies and their parents on a boat together. At some point the ship gets caught up in a storm, leading to everyone being stranded on an island. And it just so happens that the Wild Thornberries are also on that island. Okay, you're gonna have to bear with me here, because this is where the story kind of falls off a cliff. Nigel and the mom are in the middle of searching for this purple leopard. Eliza and Darwin go off to help. Meanwhile, the adults of Rugrats are planning a way to get off the island, while still being mad at Stu. Earlier in the film, it's established that Tommy sort of looks up to Nigel from watching his nature show, so believing Nigel's somewhere on the island, the babies go off on their own to look for him. All except for Angelica, who wanted to trick the babies into believing she was an island princess. Angelica wanders off, and meets Debbie vibing on the beach. With the babies, Chucky ends up losing the group, and later encounters Donnie, who steals his clothes, leaving Chucky with just Donnie's shorts. While that's going on, Eliza and Darwin encounter Tommy's dog Spike, who went out searching for the babies. Oh yeah, and he can talk too, I guess. Yeah, this film's kind of a mess. I'm not saying films can't balance multiple characters, but here it's just not executed well, with so many plot points that just go nowhere. The story about Chucky and Donnie switching clothes wraps up before it even starts. There's an arc where Eliza and Debbie want to spend more downtime with their parents, but they barely delve into that. There's a plot point about Lil wanting to become a vegetarian. That goes nowhere. Even the leopard they established, who you'd think was going to be a major antagonist, after a certain point, it just completely disappears. When it comes to the other crossover stuff, nothing interesting is really done with them. I already brought up the Angelica and Debbie stuff, that subplot is kinda whatever. Nigel getting hit in the head with a coconut while making the babies was just an excuse to tell man-baby jokes. I honestly think it would have been more interesting if Nigel didn't get bonked on the head with being the babies. That way it could be a reminder to him that he should spend more time with his own kids. And then we have the stuff between Eliza, Darwin, and Spike. Now having Spike meet Eliza, so she could use her powers to talk to him, does make sense. It's just a shame Spike is not very funny here. The same could be said for the rest of the movie. The other two Rugrats movies had their fair share of toilet jokes, but they feel a lot more frequent here. Okay, so was there anything about this movie I liked? Well, there's a few musical numbers, and they're a little better than the first movie's songs. They're a little more catchy this time around, and I thoroughly enjoyed the song between Spike and the leopard. The visuals are notably different. The island shots look pretty nice, very big and detailed. Some of the character animation is noticeably more expressive than the first few movies, so that's cool, I guess. I kinda like this one scene where Chucky meets this monkey who's getting harassed by other monkeys, and Chucky defended it from said monkeys. That was pretty cute. And the scene where Nigel and the babies are about to drown in the bathysphere. and Nigel has to comfort the babies before they drown. That was also a pretty nice scene. But aside from all that, Rugrats Go Wild is not very good. I don't really want to say a Rugrats and Wild Thornberries crossover flat out couldn't work, but it would be pretty hard to pull off. These are two drastically different shows, one being more grounded in reality, and another being more adventure heavy with magical elements. And this movie really does show that, while also being a pretty disappointing bookend for the Rugrats movie trilogy, and to some extent the Wild Thornberries film duology. Thankfully, our next Nickelodeon movie is actually pretty damn good, and I think you may know what film I'm talking about. We're not talking about it yet. I have not seen a single episode of Teacher's Pet. Now, not a lot of people talk about the show these days, but it still managed to get like 5 seasons. So I guess at the time, Disney had some faith in the show if they were willing to give it a theatrical movie at the tail end of its run. Either that, or they were still desperate to nab some of that Rugrat movie pie. The show centers around a dog named Spot, who wants to fit in with humans. However, his owner Leonard wants him to be a normal dog. The film takes place during the beginning of summer vacation, where Leonard's mom is going on a business trip, and Leonard has to leave Spot behind. Spot then sees a scientist on TV, and he says that he has a device that could turn animals into humans, and he just so happens to be located in Florida, the place where Leonard and his mom are going to. So Spot dons his human disguise and joins Leonard and his mom on the trip. I gotta say, I really like Spot. He's just a really endearing, energetic character, and Nathan Lane is just fantastic in the role. Safe to say, I was fully supportive of his dream to fit in with humans. But like I said, his owner Leonard just wants Spot to be a regular dog. And this is sort of the main emotional conflict of the movie. Things only get more complicated though, once Spot successfully becomes a human. A while after this, Spot decides to marry Leonard's mom, and this is sort of a breaking point for the two. I gotta say, with all the tension being built up throughout the movie, I do think this big third act separation scene feels pretty earned. So at this point in the movie, I'm pretty hooked. The story is simple, but still pretty well paced and heartwarming. So anyway, the ending kind of fucks everything up. Near the end of the movie, Leonard decides that he needs to become a dog, so he can still be with Spot while he lives out his dream. The evil scientist also has his own plans for Spot and Leonard, wanting to put the two in some kind of exhibit. Of course, the scientist is defeated, and Spot turns back to normal. And he just accepts being a dog, even though he fought tooth and nail throughout the movie to fit in with humans. Yeah, that's a great fucking message right there. If there's someone or something you aspire to be, screw that and stick with what you currently are, regardless of whether or not you're comfortable with it. In all fairness, the ending is pretty damn rushed. Like, the film just kind of stops after that point, so maybe we weren't meant to interpret that exact message, but man, is this still just a lousy ending. Keep in mind too, this is supposed to be the finale for the show, and Spot's goal of being with humans remains in said show, so it just makes the film's ending all the more off-putting. On the subject of stuff I didn't like, this movie is also a musical, and I can barely remember any of the songs. And there's also this weird running joke where Spot's all like, "Oh boy, you're not gonna sing, are you?" Even though we still willingly sing certain musical numbers. The only song I remember is "A Friend Needs a Friend." It's pretty good, kinda sweet I guess. That's all I really have to say. Schoolhouse Rock singer Jack Sheldon sings one of the songs. It's a song that plays during a montage where Spot is having some fun in his human form, so that's neat I guess. Going back to positives, the animation is really nice. It doesn't look super cinematic, but the character animation is super smooth and a delight to look at. All in all, the Teacher's Pet movie is fine, I guess. Most of the movie is still solid, with solid pacing and a fun protagonist, but man does that ending kinda ruin some of it for me. Remember when I said I wanted to talk about every one of these movies? Well, yeah, I meant it. Even if it means unironically discussing Clifford the Big Red Dog. Clifford started off as a series of books, but eventually got a popular animated series that aired on PBS Kids from 2000 to 2003. The show was long over when I started watching PBS, but they did rerun the show in my area. A year after the series ended, a Clifford movie would be released in theaters. The film follows Clifford and his friends, Clea and T-Bone, coming across this crappy circus. The owner of said crappy circus wants to enter this talent show hosted by John Goodman, who runs a dog food business. That way they can get the money to keep the circus going. Clifford and his friends initially consider joining the circus for the money, but Clifford declines. The next day, Clifford overhears Emily Elizabeth's parents talking about how much they have to spend on feeding him. Feeling guilty about this, Clifford and his friends leave his home island to help the circus. And yeah, it's about as straightforward as it sounds. Credit where credit is due, I do appreciate how they went for a pretty simple story. Instead of making it about Clifford fighting aliens or time traveling or whatever, they just made it about him joining a circus. Nothing more, nothing less. They knew Clifford was a slice of life show first and foremost, so if we're doing a movie, it should apply here. Goes to show that not every one of these movies has to have some super grand plot or high stakes. They just need to have the story justify a longer runtime. Now, I don't want to be too harsh toward this movie because, again, it is for like little kids, but I'm not really a fan of how in the last 20 minutes, Clifford just kind of gets captured by John Goodman, because his daughter really wanted him. But going back on a more positive note, earlier in the film, it's established that Clifford, Clea, and T-Bone have to pretend they're stray animals, as they wouldn't be accepted into the circus if they had owners. It would have been really easy to have this stupid forced lie reveal scene where the circus guys are mad at Clifford and his friends for lying and hate their guts all of a sudden, like we've seen time and time again in so many mainstream animated films. But no, they don't go in that direction. When the lie is revealed, it motivates the circus guys to help Clea and T-Bone save Clifford. I kinda like that. My only other major highlight of the film is just a scene where Clifford is helping this cow get over her fear of heights, so she won't be scared of doing her tightrope act anymore. Not much to it, it's just a really cute scene. But aside from that, Clifford's Really Big Movie is as standard as these kind of movies get. Really don't have much else to say here.
But maybe I do.
Oh hey, it's Glad and Gladiator, aka the guy who inspired this video.
The early 2000s Clifford series was a huge part of my childhood, so mind if I take a crack at it?
Floor's all yours, dude.
How am I only now just finding out that Scholastic has its own production company? Come to think of it, do they even do book fairs anymore? Cause I haven't heard anything about those in a long time, though that could just be because I'm grown-ass now. Premiering on April 23rd, 2004, Clifford's Really Big Movie follows the gargantuan canine and his friends as they run away from home to join a travelling animal show. His motivation for doing so is that they are planning to enter a contest hosted by his favourite dog food company where the winner will receive a lifetime supply, which Clifford wants to do to help out his owners after fearing he has become a financial burden. This is honestly a pretty genius concept for a movie based on this character, since it plays on perhaps the biggest questions surrounding this property outside the absurdity of the general premise. That being, how on earth can they afford to feed him? So using that foundation for this narrative is pretty inspired. I admire how the film just kind of throws you in at the deep end. It doesn't waste any time establishing all of the backstory. It just goes, large dog, red, you get the idea. A lot of these kind of movies can get bogged down because they feel a need to give all the characters this formal introduction to newcomers. But here they jump right into the story and let you infer the character relationships from their interactions alone, demonstrating a level of trust in the audience that you don't often see in these kinds of movies. They do something interesting once Clifford first leaves the island, where it essentially becomes a cartoon character enters the real world plot, but done quite well. By removing the characters from their safe space and entering an unfamiliar environment, it calls attention to how ridiculous this whole thing is by having fun with how people react to seeing Clifford. This is not a complex story, though I actually ended up being somewhat caught off guard by the direction the story takes at the end of the second act. Never in a million years would I suspect the Clifford movie to have a genuinely surprising plot twist, but here we are. However, the movie's primary selling point is its visuals. I take a lot of issue with folks who diminish the effort that goes into adapting a cartoon for the big screen. You know what I'm talking about, jokes about how all they do is add some extra shading to the characters and call it a day, while ignoring more technical stuff like the cinematography or the detail in the environments, which is what truly makes it stand out from its TV counterpart. Clifford the Big Red Dog had this simple look that closely resembled the original book illustrations, with flat colours and thick outlines. In comparison, the movie goes for a much greater sense of depth, giving the characters thinner outlines and using colour gradients to make them appear more three-dimensional while still maintaining that appeal with how saturated and vibrant it all is. As you can imagine from this sort of production, the character animation has received a noticeable upgrade with a higher fidelity that at times can look really beautiful. Everything has this nice bounce to it with a lot of strong posing. I do wish that they had pushed the facial expressions a little more, because there are some really funny drawings here, but they are few and far between. The film clearly had a limited budget, and it's not difficult to see where they've cut corners, but the crew was able to make it work to their benefit. The series already had these lovely watercolour backgrounds which have been carried over with far richer detail, making for some really nice shots. This frame of Emily Elizabeth standing in Clifford's empty doghouse might be my favourite shot in the entire movie. It's so simple while also being effective at communicating information to the viewer and playing with the scale of Clifford in a way I wish the film did more often. This type of artistry is what sets these films apart from their shows. This movie marks the final film role of John Ritter, which was recorded shortly before his passing and is dedicated to his memory. His performance as Clifford contains such an endearing warmth and innocence that clearly demonstrates why this remains the character's most defining iteration.
Whenever a friend of mine felt bad, I'd give her a ride. A ride always helped make her feel better.
Cree Summer reprises her role as Cleo the Poodle and delivers my favourite performance in the film. This perfect balance of being ego-driven yet still genuine and kind that is so difficult to pull off. Cleo also ends up carrying a lot of the film's comedy, as you can tell the animators were having the most fun with her.
Have I ever steered you wrong?
Well,
don't answer that.
Rounding out the trio is T-Bone, whom I was really worried I wasn't gonna like from his introduction, but he did quickly grow on me. He's far more than a typical dumb character, as there is a level of self-awareness that prevents him from becoming annoying. It also helps that Kel Mitchell gives such a likeable performance.
Maybe you misunderstood him. I'm always misunderstanding things.
You don't say.
Both Cleo and T-Bone end up losing relevance as the story continues, where they don't really have anything to do. But the film does a great job making their friendship with Clifford palpable to the audience. As I was watching, I was holding my breath for an inevitable fight between them to add some unnecessary drama, but that doesn't happen, as the trio remain fully supportive and loving throughout. The last major character from the series is Emily Elizabeth, played by Grey DeLisle, who also does a great job despite not really being in the movie all that much. Which is especially strange considering that in the show, she was essentially the second protagonist. Once Clifford leaves, the movie ends up kind of forgetting about her. Like, they have this scene of her discovering where Clifford has gone, and you think it's gonna lead to her going after him, but instead, they drop her entirely until the very end. Then, of course, there are a bunch of new characters who fill out the cast with some celebrities. Wayne Brady as Shackleford, a ferret who grows jealous of Clifford for taking his place as the star of the carnival. It's really funny because this guy spends almost the entire movie being a complete prick until having the most rushed redemption arc I've ever seen. It's like a complete change of heart in under 5 seconds. It's kind of hilarious. There's other talent like John Goodman, Jess Harnell, and Ernie Hudson, but my favourite new player is Dorothy, voiced by Jenna Elfman, a tightrope walking cow that Clifford has to help get over her fear of heights. Elfman adds a lot of humour and heart to what could have easily been a throwaway character, and she ends up having a much more prominent role than you'd expect. I don't think I'd ever actually seen this movie in full before. I remember catching a glimpse of it while channel surfing and being surprised that it existed. And I missed out because this was delightful and does make me curious to revisit the show at some point in the future. It's not a cinematic masterpiece, not even close, but it's a pleasant time with some pretty visuals that, for what it is, does try to be a little ambitious and provide an experience that would likely please fans of the show. Thank you so much, Thad, for allowing me to contribute, and I hope y'all enjoy the rest of the video.
Monkey boing.
SpongeBob SquarePants. I know who he is, you know who he is. I seen the show when I was a kid, you've probably seen the show when you were a kid. I watched the movie a few times as a kid, you probably watched the movie a few times as a kid. The film follows SpongeBob and Patrick going on this big road trip to retrieve King Neptune's crown in Shell City, after it was stolen by Plankton in an attempt to blame the situation on Mr. Krabs, so he can steal the Krabby Patty recipe and later rule the world. Yeah, I'm not going to spend much time on this one. Many people have already sung this film's praises, and I agree with just about everything that's been said over the years.
Yes, the film is really funny, with plenty of great gags and quotable moments and next big meme faces, and I also just love King Neptune, he's super funny. Yes, SpongeBob has a great arc about embracing the kid within him, while also proving he's a capable adult. As someone who's on the autism spectrum, and who wants people to know that I'm mature enough to handle certain things, I can sort of relate to SpongeBob in this movie, when he's just seen as a kid by everyone, and doesn't get the promotion from Mr. Krabs. And yeah, it is a bit disappointing that certain characters like Sandy and Squidward don't get a lot to do. I guess it does help make the film a little more focused, but I feel like they could have gotten a bit more screen time. I guess I could also bring up the fact that creator Steven Hillenburg wanted the show to end after the first movie, but Nickelodeon wouldn't allow it. I think it's just something Hillenburg wanted for the series, but was never actually going to be the plan. So yeah, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Everyone knows it's a great film, and I agree. Moving on. Aqua Teen Hunger Force. By far one of Adult Swim's most beloved shows. The show has a very simple premise. 3 fast food characters getting into surreal shenanigans. With a premise as simple and straightforward as that, how could you possibly make a movie out of the series? Well, they tried in 2007. The film follows our main trio of living fast food characters, Master Shake, Frylock, and Meatwad, discovering an exercise machine. They later find the battery for said machine, and it turns huge and starts destroying the city, laying other small exercise machines in the process. So they have to stop it. I'm just gonna come right out and say it. This is pretty much just a longer episode of the show. You may think I mean this is a bad thing, but in all honesty, I really don't. The show is pure nonsense, so it makes sense for the movie to be pure nonsense. Your enjoyment will depend on if you're a fan of the show, or if you can tolerate shows similar to this. Well, as someone who's seen the show and who can tolerate this kind of stupid humor, so it's safe to say I like this movie. Of course, I enjoyed how stupid the plot was, but I also enjoyed the character interactions, especially the banter between Shake and Frylock. Frylock being the straight man of the trio, while Master Shake is the idiotic troublemaker. And at least some pretty humorous interactions between the two. I also like how they incorporated side characters from the show, like these 2 spiky aliens and this future robot, who have a pretty big part in the exercise machine stuff, these 2 Atari-looking aliens called the Moonanites, this demon rapper MCP Pants, even Dr. Weird, a character who used to have his own brief segments at the start of every episode, plays a big role in this movie. Yeah, after a while, the exercise machine stuff is kind of abandoned and focuses more on the origin story of Master Shake, Frylock, and Meatwad, and how they were created by Dr. Weird. Of course, given what kind of show this is, I'm not sure if this really means much in the long run. All in all, the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie is pretty good. It knew exactly what kind of show it was adapting and just went with it. If you're a fan of the show and never seen this movie yet, definitely check it out. If you're a newcomer, proceed with caution. And here we are at our last film of the 2000s. Ideas for a Simpsons movie date all the way back to when season 4 was in production, where an executive producer, James L. Brooks, suggested they turn an episode where Bart and Lisa go to camp into a movie. That never happened, as the writers could barely stretch the idea into a 22-minute episode. Other ideas for a movie included a Fantasia parody, an extended Treehouse of Horror special, a live-action spin-off starring a character the late Phil Hartman played. There were even various ideas tossed around when a movie was officially greenlit in 2001. Some of these ideas included a story where Steven Spielberg wanted to blow up Springfield for a movie, The Simpsons saving some manatees, that would actually be the plot of the Season 17 premiere, and The Simpsons finding out that their lives were an elaborate TV show, a la The Truman Show. That's an idea that creator Matt Groening hated, by the way. They would eventually lock onto an idea, and the film would release in 2007. And despite the show's golden age being long over at that point, the film was a huge hit, and still managed to be received pretty well. One day after everyone in Springfield cleaned out the polluted lake, Homer, not knowing about the cleaning, dumps a whole bunch of pig feces in there. This would lead to the Environmental Protection Agency to have a big dome placed over Springfield. The Simpsons family managed to escape to Alaska, but this would ultimately cause tension between Homer and his family. Right off the bat, this is a funny-ass movie. I'm surprised at just how many moments managed to make me laugh. I especially love how all the side characters from the show get little gags throughout. Even without context of the show, they really managed to make Springfield feel like a fully realized place. And it goes to show that you can utilize a massive side cast in one of these movies. Homer's arc is also pretty good too. We all know Homer can be pretty childish and irresponsible at times. And from what I know, at this point in the series, he can be downright cruel. And that kinda stays true in the movie. What Homer did to the town is what really starts to destroy his relationship with the rest of the family. Marge is willing to give him another chance, but it's ultimately ruined once they find out Springfield is going to be blown up, and Homer just refuses to go back with the others and take responsibility for what he did. The movie works fairly well as a character study for Homer, where his behavior almost destroys his hometown and starts to drive away his family, and by the end he ultimately learns to be a better person. I'm not sure if this arc actually stuck with him in the rest of the series going forward, but hey, it's still pretty well handled here. Despite all I just said, the movie does have a few issues that keep it from being great. The film has a few pacing issues, and they could really bog down the movie for me. A major example I have is the fact that it takes 30 minutes for the dome stuff to actually kick in. The first 30 minutes of the film aren't bad per se, there's plenty of great jokes and some decent setup for what's to come, but yeah, we definitely could have gotten to the big stuff quicker. I know this pig is kind of a major part of the film's identity, but after The Simpsons leave Springfield, it just completely disappears. There's also a few jokes that kind of ruin some of the serious scenes, like this one bit after Homer watches his tape Marge sent him, very good scene by the way. When he goes out to start searching for his family, there's this weird to be continued joke, which easily could have been edited out. There's also a subplot involving Bart, where he starts to bond more with Flanders, as he's much more of a father figure to him than his actual father figure. It's a really nice subplot, but it quickly concludes with a joke, and yeah, that's kinda disappointing. I also don't really like Lisa's subplot. It's just a really generic one where she falls in love with this kid named Colin, who by the way, isn't even that interesting. Speaking of uninteresting characters who only show up in this movie, I don't really like the villain either. He's kinda boring and not really that funny either. All in all, I think it's the pacing issues that hold this movie back from being great. But as someone who hasn't seen that much of the Simpsons TV show, I still thought the movie was pretty good. I honestly think it's impressive that despite the show's well-documented decline in quality, it still turned out to be decent. Often regarded as one of the last good things to come out after the Simpsons golden age. And it seems like Disney sees a lot of value in the Simpsons IP, for better or for worse. And I wouldn't be surprised if another Simpsons movie is at least being considered over there. And if that's the case, I honestly wouldn't mind another Simpsons movie.
Well, I'll be damned.
And now here's another segment from FunnyHappyStudios.
Wait, what?
Monkey boing.
Yeah, as much as I've loved the Simpsons movie, I've slowly felt indifferent towards the film as I've grown up, in a critical point of view. It was hilarious as a kid, and I still end up quoting a lot of lines. Especially whatever comes out of Mr. Burns' mouth. Shame this old geezer didn't get more than one scene. Quite disappointing. But what I think stings the most about this movie is the story. The Simpsons' first feature-length film and biggest adventure yet is going to Alaska and being targeted by the Environmental Protection Agency. I like the idea of the town being trapped in a dome and slowly going insane, but once the Simpsons leaves that dome, it completely loses my interest. Why couldn't the film continue focusing on the Simpsons being stuck with everyone who hates their guts? The stakes would have been much higher, and we get to see how these five get affected from complete isolation. No more imports of beer for Homer, no internet. Yeah, this would have opened more story opportunities than them being on the run. Everything with Springfield falling under chaos only happens off camera, and it hurts my feelings. Meanwhile, Lisa's B-plot with Colin could be taken out of the film and very little would change. This kid doesn't even make it into the show. It's obvious that they threw in a romance for Lisa because they didn't know what else to do with her. She doesn't even have a character arc. How did none of the 12 writers for this movie not have an idea for her? Okay, let's talk about the villain now. Russ Cargill, pretty stupid name, is extremely weak, both being as an antagonist and a character. I don't think it's explained well enough as to why he wanted to imprison and bomb an entire town. And he hardly even meets Homer, who started everything. He's one-dimensional, and he's just a cheap Hank Scorpio knockoff. Also, Homer driving a motorcycle upside down on the dome is physically impossible. I can't even pass it off as nonsensical humor because the climax is trying to take itself seriously. I hope somebody got fired for that blunder. It may sound like a lot of negatives, but I don't know. It's still funny as long as you haven't watched it over 15 times, and you do get a lot of great moments from the side characters. Speaking of which, all of the side characters get background appearances aside from Sideshow Bob. On one hand, this feels like a real celebratory milestone for the Simpsons franchise. But on the other hand, it wastes so much, and in the end, it feels like a very long episode. 8 out of 10. 7, because nobody thought of digging under the dome.
So that's a wrap for the 2000s. By far the biggest era for this subgenre. It certainly had some good films, but some of these were clearly just put into theaters to chase a big trend. Some may say the general public caught on to this and wouldn't support most of these movies, as they'd rather watch the shows at home for no extra cost. But I think we also have to take marketing and timing into account, especially with Powerpuff Girls and Hey Arnold. But alas, after the Simpsons movie, there would be a pretty significant drought in these kinds of films. Of course, this isn't to say we didn't get any cartoon movies. Why else do you think this video hasn't ended yet? But this next era is definitely a far cry from the early 2000s. Though given some of those movies we already talked about, maybe it's for the best they slowed down.
let's talk about these last few movies. You know, with the success of the first movie, and SpongeBob's popularity in general, it's a bit strange that Nickelodeon waited over 10 years to put out another movie. I actually remember seeing this in theaters when it came out, but I haven't really watched it since though. But obviously I had to rewatch it for this video, so does it hold up? I mean, it's alright, I guess. The film follows Plankton trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula yet again. SpongeBob tries to stop him, but the formula just vanishes right in front of the two. Everyone in town still thinks Plankton stole it, but SpongeBob, knowing he's innocent, escapes with Plankton. Without the formula, Bikini Bottom becomes an apocalyptic wasteland. Later it's revealed that an evil live-action pirate named Burger Beard used a magic book to steal the formula for himself. Don't question it, the film doesn't really use the book that much. Many people have pointed this out, but a majority of the film's marketing was about SpongeBob and his friends exploring the surface, and becoming superheroes. However, a majority of the actual film takes place at Bikini Bottom during the apocalypse, with SpongeBob trying to prove Plankton's innocent with time travel. And when we eventually make it to the surface, it feels like a completely different movie. Despite the film's lack of focus, it's definitely not without merit. SpongeBob and Plankton do have a fun dynamic. SpongeBob's goofy optimism and Plankton's malicious cynicism lead to some pretty solid chemistry between the two. And I did have some fun with the superhero shenanigans once they got up to the surface. Some of the power choices fit really well with the characters too, like SpongeBob being a bubble-based superhero, Squidward having a powerful clarinet, and I think Mr. Krabs being a robot could be a reference to Crabborg. The film also tries giving Plankton some kind of redemption arc, where throughout his journey with SpongeBob, he learns to become less selfish. And near the end of the film, there's a moment where you'll think he learned his lesson and will stop trying to steal the formula. But right after that, he tries to steal the formula yet again. So that whole arc really didn't mean anything. There are other things I could talk about, like these seagull characters aren't all that funny. There's this photorealistic dolphin character named Bubbles. This time around, the movie's a little more creative with the animation, like with this one scene where Plankton's in SpongeBob's mind, or this rap number by the end. But I really don't have much else to say beyond that. All in all, Sponge Out of Water is fine, I guess. The plot is kinda messy and it isn't as funny as the previous movie, but beyond that, it's still somewhat enjoyable. My Little Pony is a franchise that's existed since the 80s, the first 3 iterations not being much to write home about, just generic fluff meant to advertise toys. But things changed once the 4th iteration rolled around. While still being a toy commercial of sorts, Friendship is Magic tried to have sharper writing and eventually expansive world building, which would really strike a chord with a lot of people outside the target demographic. It really showed that this franchise could be so much more than just an extended toy commercial for little girls. Some older fans may know that I've talked about the show quite a bit on my channel, and while I have watched the 2017 movie before this video, I never got a chance to talk about it. Of course, that changes right now. The film follows Twilight and her friends getting ready for a friendship festival. Then, everything changed when the Storm King attacked. Twilight and her friends manage to escape and have to embark on a grand adventure to find a species called the Hippogriffs, who they believe can help them fight off the Storm King. In all honesty, I'm a bit conflicted on Twilight's arc. The beginning of the film establishes that she can be easily stressed out, and the pressure of having to save Equestria makes her feel cynical and jaded throughout most of the film, when she's supposed to be the embodiment of friendship and unity. Aside from a pretty stupid scene where she tries to steal the Hippogriff's orb, I'd say this arc is handled fairly well. My main issue is that this movie came out after season 7 of the show. Now granted, I haven't really watched the earlier seasons of Friendship is Magic in a while, but I still have to ask, is this really something Twilight needed to learn this late in the series? Especially considering the fact that this is a very continuity heavy show. And the next 2 seasons also make it pretty damn clear that this movie is canon. But what about Twilight's other friends? How are they handled in this movie? Some have complained that they act really childish and barely focus on the mission. I mostly disagree. I like how despite the circumstance they're in, they're still willing to bond with and help out the new characters introduced in this film. More specifically, Rarity, Rainbow Dash, and Pinkie Pie get significant moments of bonding with the new characters. Applejack and Fluttershy are completely shafted. Fluttershy especially, she barely has any lines throughout the film. Speaking of shafted characters from the show, Friendship is Magic is another series that has a pretty massive cast of side characters, and aside from a few blinking on Easter eggs, they're also completely shafted here. I know this may seem like a pretty minor thing to bitch about, but like I said, the Simpsons movie did manage to use its sidecast pretty well. And while yeah, it's no big deal, I feel like they could have done something a bit more with the sidecast. Maybe scenes where we cut back to Equestria every now and again, to see how the Storm King's reign is affecting everyone. But alas, instead of seeing more snips and snails, we get, oh boy, that cameo didn't age well. When it comes to the other movie characters, the main villains are fine. There's a stupid mole who's kind of the funny villain, and his whole gimmick is basically food jokes, and it gets old pretty fast. Tempest is a pretty alright character. She doesn't really have a whole lot of backstory, but it's enough to understand why she is the way she is. I feel like the Storm King himself was kinda wasted. Liev Schreiber, hope I pronounced that right, really gives his character so much life and energy. But he mostly shows up during the last few minutes of the movie, and he really doesn't do that much. As for the new characters who are good guys, there's this cat guy named Capper, and he lives in this shitty house in this shitty village. He initially wanted to sell the main six to this mole man, but of course he does genuinely grow a bond with them, especially Rarity when she fixes up his jacket. You also have these sky pirates who used to be pirates, but the Storm King forced them to be delivery people. For some reason. Rainbow Dash is ultimately the one who convinces them to be pirates again. Then we have the Hippogriffs, who are meant to be half eagle, half pony creatures, but could transform into mermaid ponies, and have been using that form to hide from the Storm King. Queen Nova and her daughter Skystar are fine, I guess. Skystar can be a little annoying, but she's kinda cute. I think my main issue with these new characters is that there's clearly lore established for them, and I just kinda wanted to learn more about them. Oh well. At least the animation's really good. I especially love the character animation. It's very expressive, and the new pony models here are freaking adorable. I initially thought this was hand-drawn animation, but I recently just found out this is animated with rigs. That's pretty impressive. My favorite aspect of this movie by far are the songs. Friendship is Magic had its fair share of song numbers, so it only makes sense this movie would be a musical. And the songs here are just a delight to listen to. My three favorites being Time to Be Awesome, the song Rainbow Dash sings to the pirates, One Small Thing, a song where the main six are having a bit of fun with Skystar before they leave, but my absolute favorite of the three is Capper's song, A Friend in Need. This song is just bars. So yeah, the movie's okay, I guess. At the end of the day, it is a really basic adventure story for kids, and the only real strong feelings I have for this movie are the songs. While I may come back to the songs every now and again, I highly doubt I'll ever come back to this movie after this video's finished. Smoke, do you want to talk about the 2017 My Little Pony movie for a bit?
Okay.
Monkey boing.
I was only 14 and had just entered the Brony fandom when I saw the 2017 MLP movie in theaters. Back then, I thought it was amazing! And while I will say that the animation is still pretty to look at, and that I still adore the soundtrack of this film, that being every song except for Rainbow, because I'm 22 years old now, and I can say that the Sia Pony is not the only thing that's aged poorly. Let's talk about world building, though. I used to think that the Storm King was funny and nothing else, as back then, I neglected just how present he was in the grand scheme of the film. While he doesn't get more than 6 minutes of physical screen time, his presence is persistent to the 14th minute onward, as his insignia hangs across buildings and merchandise. Even in Kludgetown, where the iconography only appears when Tempest enters, the fear of the Storm King is maintained by Capper and the citizens alike. There's even an offhand mention of—
I'll give you 2 storm bucks!
Why is this reminiscent of Street Fighter the movie?
This money isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
The Storm King's power lies not in his physical prowess, hence why he strives to accentuate the storm part of his title. It lies in his control of the people's lives, in fear and control, in slavery and imprisonment. That's all Ciliano's crew and Tempest are to him, a means to an end, to expand his influence and empower him respectively. And him being both a competent threat and a hilarious goofball helps take who I once regarded as a mid-villain and made him a far better villain in my eyes. Kludgetown on its own stands out with its bartering system. And it's not just bartering in a resource for a resource of similar value, no. It is desperate and vicious. A society that captures creatures to sell either for commodity's sake or in exchange. And that includes creatures just as sapient as the buyers.
How much for the giant gecko?
Who you calling a gecko?
Spike isn't for sale.
Or even just tearing a unicorn horn off in exchange for currency. It's all in Capper's words.
What's the catch?
Steal as he may for a few friendly folk, he's gotten so used to the system that offerings with no trade-off are a rarity. A somewhat patched-up jacket is a small thing to treasure, admittedly, and it is an otherwise insignificant action, if not for the dialogue.
Oh, don't thank me, really.
But it's the thought of someone treating him with kindness for the first time in so long for him to be willing to continue helping them. After all, just about everything he possesses was likely stolen. It's not the strongest reformation from this franchise, not by a long shot, but it's these implications, his character design, and his absolute banger of a song that makes Capper my favorite character in this movie. Moving to Mount Eris, it can be presumed the overgrown architecture makes up the former homes of the hippogriffs when scaling the size of the buildings to the ponies, and comparing the structures to the Sequestria Palace. Same goes for the steps. Well, I'd assume the citizens ascend and descend the steps in their avian forms, and that would track with Silverstream's remarks on stairs in Season 8.
And we care because...
Stairs are awesome! We don't have anything like them underwater because, you know, no way to climb them.
But then, why make them so mountainous? Judging from the height and the 13 lines of steps, unless people want to get their exercise each way, this is most definitely a means to keep intruders out. After all, why ascend or descend the stairs normally when you have wings? Tracks all the more when the aquatic entrance can generate a vortex that would most definitely drown its victims. Though it's funny that nobody tries to swim out of it at any point. What was it that Nova said?
You know surface dwellers are forbidden here.
Then we got
Fizzle Pop Berry Twist.
On a base level, she serves as a narrative parallel to Twilight. Both put their faith in those around them, Twilight and her long-lasting friendships, Tempest and her troops, and yet feel that those around them can't truly help. The foot soldiers are merely to round up the large groups and intimidate, when Tempest can whoop ass and annihilate her prey with ease. Twilight and her friends have a bond that they hold deep enough to call out Twilight and not give up on her, even after she snaps at the infamous shore argument scene. This is, of course, where Open Up Your Eyes comes in, with two different approaches to the importance of self-reliance, when you can't trust others and they only hurt you more.
If you depend on others, you'll never find your place.
On one hand, an easy argument is that Tempest can't keep to her own word, faking that the Storm King will restore her horn.
We had an agreement.
Get with the program! I used you!
But on the other hand, note that before the Storm King appears, she says the following.
Tempest, don't do this. Don't give the Storm King your
Magic? Did you think you'd keep it all to yourself? Time to share. I'd love for everybody out there to know what I can really do.
Because of how she grows to see the true bonds of friendship during the final battle, the most this line is paid off is setting off fireworks in a more artistic manner. The same fireworks she attempted mass murder with. For a unicorn with a severed horn, that's a lot of power to have and claim you want to regained, without an ulterior motive. I don't think she just wanted her horn back, and let the Storm King do as he wished in exchange for it, like an absolute buffoon. No. If she could execute the plan without the ape getting in the way, she would take the alicorn power for herself, become perhaps an even greater threat than the Storm King. To take that self-imposed isolation out in the world, with the most powerful beings incarcerated, and Twilight still seeing the good in her, though that was not part of the plan, and none to stop her firework magic from evolving into a nuclear weapon. All the same as she was to the Storm King was but a means to an end for Tempest. And well, that's not what we got to see. But none of this would have happened if it wasn't for that damned shore argument. Don't get me wrong, it is well built up when you look at the reckless behavior of Pinky and Dash. And it's not like it's completely out of character for either of them. Plonk is the one who yaks and can't shut her yapper to save her life, and Dash is definitely one who has a tendency to not be humble. Though to me, letting out that rainbow and completely forgetting who's hot in your tail is pushing it. That said, it is understandable that Twilight would lose her mind over her friends being so overly trusting and self-sabotaging in their adventuring. And to be fair, Twilight was desperate when Novo refused to lend the pearl.
The pearl is not going anywhere.
And you can't just hide down here, trapped forever? There's so much you're missing.
They came all the way there by the request of Celestia, but Celestia was too ignorant to realize what had already happened to Novo's people, and it was all for naught. But this argument could have been prevented in two ways. One, tell the gang what she was planning on doing, and make it clear what little choice they have at this point. That would at least make the 6 not feel double-crossed. Better yet, 2, be willing to let Ponkapo lead her musical number and just let her friends have fun for the sake of it. Or join in and have the whole gang prove their worthiness in Sequestria's trust. But no, she had to steal the pearl and not tell anyone. It just feels so forced and contrived. Like, we need to push that parallel between Tempest and Twilight. Sure, that parallel works really well. And to that extent, it makes the finale hit hard.
Face it, Princess. Friendship has failed you too.
Friendship didn't fail me. I failed friendship.
But at what cost? What if instead she was willing to help and things didn't work out, and she was the one who snapped out of frustration with her friends and the whole quest? Would have been better to not force the conflict, to say the least. I could name some more obvious criticisms, like Celestia and Luna not even trying to fight back against Tempest, and somehow it's Cadence, the weakest of the three, arguably, who does the fighting back and fails. Or how Purple Smart, Ponk, Dash, and Rarity are the only ones to do anything plot significant, while Applejack, Fluttershy, and Spike only get action moments and serve as moral support. It's still pretty bad. And while I would forgive it for how large the My Little Pony cast is, it's also why Discord only gets a cameo as a balloon, it just makes these issues a lot more frustrating. It's a shame, as someone who really liked this movie as a teenager, to look at a movie I once loved and to now see it as underwhelming. Not devoid of artistic merit by any means, as I hope I've made clear, but lacking that merit that it really needed. But hey, at least I had more time in the oven than the 1986 My Little Pony movie. That's how you go from alright and enjoyable to mid! Anyways, if you'll excuse me,
Ryan!
Oh, shit! Oh, shit! Brian's dead! No!
Do it, monkey, monkey, boing.
Back in the year 2003, Cartoon Network put out an animated series called Teen Titans, based on the DC Comics series of the same name. The show was pretty successful, lasting for about 5 seasons. However, its 5th season had a interesting finale. After that point, not a whole lot came out of the franchise, just a TV movie and some comedic chibi shorts. And those shorts would actually end up inspiring the next major Teen Titans project. 2013 would see the release of Teen Titans Go, and unlike the 2003 show which balanced action, comedy, and drama, this new show was pretty much all comedy, and everyone online took it pretty well. Did I say they took it well? What I meant to say was they absolutely fucking hated it. While there may have been some valid complaints here and there, the hate was a bit much. It got to a point where even the show itself had entire episodes dedicated to its hate base. Thankfully nowadays, the hate has significantly died down, and people are starting to realize the show was never that bad, and the excessive hate wasn't really necessary. Especially now that we have an entire generation of adults who grew up loving the show when they were kids, myself included. Speaking of kids, Go still managed to be pretty damn popular with its target demographic, and I guess it still is to this day. So I guess a theatrical movie would be warranted, and it somewhat paid off. The film follows the Teen Titans wanting to get their own movie, Robin especially. Easier said than done, since just about all the other superheroes don't take him seriously. They believe in order to get a movie and be taken seriously by the other heroes, they first gotta get their own nemesis, and they eventually meet one in the form of Slade. Obviously, the whole Titans not being taken seriously thing could be seen as a metaphor for how people view the show, but unlike the show, it's not blatant in your face. And while they don't delve into it too much, I think it works. I mainly noticed a parallel with this in the SpongeBob movie. Both films have their protagonists be seen as jokes by everyone else, but by the end they ultimately prove themselves while staying true to the goofballs they are. And they also saved the day through song. And like I said, it's not much, but it was enough to get me kind of invested. Yeah, I sorta cared about the Titans here. Robin is the most passionate about getting a movie, and despite everyone not taking him seriously, the other Titans are super supportive of him. You could say it's unfaithful to the show, as in there the Titans constantly treat him like crap, but here, I don't know, it's kinda sweet. I like it. The film is also pretty funny at times, with some jokes centering around superhero movies at the time, from Stan Lee cameos to a jab towards Batman v Superman, and has lots of fun references to the show and DC in general. I also think Slade was a great addition to the movie. He barely showed up in the series, and even outside the 2003 show, Slade was always kind of their big villain. so making him the main villain of this movie was honestly kinda genius. That's not to mention he's pretty funny too. Will Arnett doing a pretty damn good job playing the character.
But the Justice League won't be coming. Because they're watching a movie, and as considerate moviegoers, I'm sure they would have turned off their mobile devices. Unlike some people.
When it comes to the animation, the character movement is more or less the same as the show. There's just a bit more shading this time around, more detailed backgrounds, and they even experiment with different art styles. That's always cool. All in all, it's no masterpiece and not every joke lands, but I still like the Teen Titans Go movie. I think it's a pretty solid, fun, heartfelt time. It may not be for everyone, especially for people who despise Teen Titans Go, but hey, I still liked it, and that's really all that matters here. I neglected to mention this, but Sponge Out of Water was a pretty big hit, even outgrossing the first movie, so it only makes sense for another movie to be announced later that year, in pre-production. The movie was originally going to be about SpongeBob and his friends going up against alien cats. I'm not joking. There would have been a plot where the aliens kidnap Gary to awaken their cat god so it could destroy Earth and turn it into a litter box. Like, I get SpongeBob is a weird show and all, but this is kind of stretching it. This story had to be changed though, as I thought it'd be too dark for the target audience. The Gary being kidnapped thing would carry into the final movie though. More on that later. Sponge on the Run was fully set to have a theatrical release. There was one tiny problem with this though. Just a little one. I cannot stress the littleness of this enough. It came out in 2020. As a result of that, it was released to Paramount Plus. So I still think it's fair game to talk about this movie. Going into this, I was well aware of its infamous reputation, so I did proceed with caution. And coming out of it, it's not as terrible as everyone says it is, but yeah, it's not great. In this movie, Plankton comes to the realization that SpongeBob is responsible for most of his plans failing, so he comes up with a plan to kidnap Gary and take him to the lost city of Atlantic City. SpongeBob would obviously go off to save Gary, with Patrick and Aquafina accompanying him. With SpongeBob distracted, Plankton believes he would have an easier time stealing the formula, but Mr. Krabs being upset at the loss of SpongeBob just gives it to him. Eventually, Krabs, Sandy, and Squidward find out that SpongeBob went to the lost city of Atlantic City, so they go off to save him. Okay, Squidward just goes along to see LPG perform. For a major positive, this is the first SpongeBob movie to be fully 3D animated, and it looks phenomenal. I love this style they went for. It's super colorful, super expressive. This style was just perfect for a 3D SpongeBob. I also just kind of enjoyed the first few minutes of the movie. There was just something pretty charming about seeing SpongeBob simply going about his life in Bikini Bottom. Once SpongeBob and Patrick's adventure actually starts, though, yeah, that's where the movie kind of falls apart. Many people have said the movie feels like a copy of the first film, and there are similarities like the fact that it's a road trip, and this Sage character having a role similar to Mindy's role in the first movie. I think there are enough differences to where it stands out, like how we do spend significantly more time in the destination, the lost city of Atlantic City. With that said, the adventure itself still isn't great. The Sage character isn't that funny with how dull Keanu Reeves' delivery is. There's a stupid El Diablo segment that amounts to nothing, basically just being a pointless Snoop Dogg music video. It feels like for most of the movie, Gary's just kind of forgotten. Even when SpongeBob and Patrick eventually reach Atlantic City, they get distracted by all the attractions. There's an entire scene where King Poseidon is about to execute SpongeBob and Patrick, but the others arrive and talk about how great of a friend he is, with flashbacks to their time at Camp Coral. Yeah, I'm not gonna get into the controversy surrounding these scenes, or how it messes with the continuity or whatever. I really don't care about that. What I do care about is how it's executed in this movie. Said execution is not very good. The Patrick and Squidward flashbacks were kinda wholesome, but the Sandy and Mr. Krabs ones are basically just SpongeBob suggesting they become scientists or open a restaurant. That's really all there is to them. A story about SpongeBob's relationship with his friends could be really interesting, but they barely delve into it throughout the movie, making this entire scene feel really ham-fisted. So yeah, Sponge on the Run is not very good. Again, definitely not as bad as some make it out to be, but aside from some great animation and decent jokes, the story is ultimately pretty messy, with certain plot points being forgotten about or just forced in. The excessive hate for this movie is a bit overblown, but yeah, it's still pretty flawed. It might be the weakest of the theatrical SpongeBob movies. Once upon a time, DreamWorks used to make 2D animated movies. One of those movies was Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, a film where the funny lunch guy from Arthur plays a talking horse. Or wait, he actually narrates over the horse. Yeah, I haven't really seen the movie. Nor have I seen the spin-off show that released in 2017, Spirit Riding Free. I have seen Spirit Untamed though, a movie that released all the way back in 2021. I somewhat remember this coming out, but then shortly after completely forgetting about it. Until now, where I had to sit through this movie for this video, and
That was terrible.
so from what I gathered, this movie is pretty much a retelling of the first episode of Riding Free. It's about this main character girl, did not bother looking up anyone's names, who goes to visit her dad in this village. Main character girl wants to ride horses, but the mom died in a horse accident, so of course, the dad forbids main character girl meeting any horses. Main character girl eventually bonds with this horse, who I think is called Spirit in this. The same horse she actually met on the train to the village. But then a bunch of other horses get captured by these generic evil guys, so the main character has to save them. I think my biggest problem with this movie is that just about every character is just so dull. Main character girl is just a super generic, overcompetent protagonist who barely has a struggle throughout the film, aside from like 1, maybe 2 scenes, and barely learns anything new by the end. Her 2 other companions only gain personalities halfway through the movie, and both of them are incredibly one-note. One of them being the super cheery, naive girl who sings songs, and the other being a snarky black girl. The dad is just a painfully paper-thin, overprotective parent, and the villains are incredibly one-note and boring. I could somewhat give the 80s movies we talked about a pass because of the time they were made, but here in 2021, there is no friggin' excuse. This movie is so boring. Easily one of the most boring, generic, paper-thin kids movies I have ever seen in my life. Maybe if you're like 6 or 7. Guys, I swear to God, that line was not intentional. And you'll get something out of this. But I seriously hope the spin-off show is better than this movie. This was just a massive waste of time. I am definitely never coming back to this again. Ooh boy, the things I'm doing for this video. Okay, I'm sure we're all familiar with Paw Patrol, right? I doubt most of you watching have even seen the show, but you've surely seen lots of merchandise and promotion for it. It's pretty damn huge with its target demographic, so it's kind of a no-brainer why it got a movie back in 2021. The film follows a titular Paw Patrol going down to Adventure City. The reason being is because the main villain of the show, Mayor Humdinger, yeah, I am not calling him that, I'm sorry, has taken over the city and is causing a lot of problems. This is also a movie about dogs, so of course the main villain has to be a cat person. Real cute. Yeah, much like with Clifford, there's really not much for me to say here. It's just the main villain fucking shit up in the city and the Paw Patrol saving the day. But I guess I'll still give some credit where it's due. I kinda like this arc the police dog Chase has, where he grew up homeless in the city, and the Paw Patrol's leader Ryder rescued him, and throughout the movie he has to get over his trauma to save the day. It's not the most deep or compelling thing ever, but it's fairly well handled, and a cute way of introducing the idea of heroes being scared to little kids. Animation's also pretty nice, mainly with the lighting and the designs of the Paw Patrol themselves. They just look so cute with all that fur. Especially this new character Liberty, she looks adorable. One of the villain's henchmen is played by Jimmy Woo from the MCU, so that's pretty nifty. I think there are also maybe a few other famous people in this movie, but I don't really know who. This one line from the villain unironically goes kinda hard.
I put my office right at the top. Now you'll have to look up to me, and I'll always look down on you.
But yeah, aside from all that, this is indeed a Paw Patrol movie. I really didn't get much out of this. There's nothing all that offensive here, but there's nothing really groundbreaking either. I'm not really a fan of Bob's Burgers. I've only seen a few episodes every once in a while, mainly at hotels. With that said, I did enjoy the episodes I've seen. And rewatching the movie, I saw it in theaters, honestly made me appreciate the show a bit more. The film was announced in October of 2017, and was expected to release sometime in 2020. But around this time, I guess someone wished on a monkey's paw for the X-Men and Fantastic Four to be in the MCU. So in 2019, Disney bought Fox. And with this movie being in production before the merger, Disney probably didn't care for it, so they released it in May of 2022 with very little marketing, and with Top Gun 2 and Multiverse of Madness releasing around the same time. The film is about the Belcher family not having enough money to pay off a loan, meaning their restaurant will be shut down within a week. To make things worse, a sinkhole appears right in front of the restaurant, meaning customers can't go in. One of the Belcher's daughters, Louise, goes inside the sinkhole to prove she's brave after being called a baby at school that day. That's when they discover a dead body within the sinkhole. The murder is then blamed on the Belcher's landlord, Mr. Fishoder, so while Bob, Linda, and Teddy have to find a way to do business despite the sinkhole, the kids go off to solve the mystery of the murder. The mystery stuff is pretty fun, and a natural way of adding tension to the story without going overboard, but I mainly enjoyed the characters. I like their style of naturalistic dialogue, and in general, they're just pretty endearing. I like Louise's arc about proving her confidence, believing her famous rabbit ears make her brave, but realizing she never needed them to be brave. I also love seeing Linda try to keep Bob's spirits up despite the situation they're in, elevated by John Roberts' fantastic performance. And I also love the scene where Bob has to encourage Linda to stay positive when she begins to lose hope. Despite this family constantly struggling to keep their restaurant afloat, they're always supportive of one another, and it's just really sweet to see. When it comes to complaints, sometimes the naturalistic dialogue can ruin serious scenes. Spoiler alert from here on out. I also don't really like the villain, Grover Fish Odor. He's really not that threatening or funny. Tina and Jean's subplots aren't the most interesting. Tina's subplot involving her asking a guy to be her boyfriend, and Jean making this napkin instrument thing. And while the songs in this movie are really great, I kinda wish there were more. But aside from all that, the Bob's Burgers movie is still good. And like I said, it really made me appreciate the show a bit more. And with this newfound respect, maybe I will watch it a little more often. Man, 2023 really had one of the greatest animated superhero movies of all time. And Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Okay, so this film's about this evil scientist who uses this machine to bring in a meteor. The meteor ends up in Adventure City, and the Paw Patrol gets superpowers from these crystals. Those powers being super speed, sonic spin dashing, flight, magneto powers, firebending, waterbending, and later on stretching.
I'm elastic and fantastic.
The scientist is on arrested Republic endangerment, but just so happens to share a cell with the villain from the last movie. So the two decide to team up and escape prison.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
And plot to steal the crystals for themselves. Once again, there's really not a whole lot for me to say here. It's just more Paw Patrol. Cape Shit Edition. Much like the last film, one of the Paw Patrol members does get their own little emotional arc. This time, the film is mainly centered around the plain dog, Sky, who has insecurities about being the smallest member. Much like the last film, it's nothing amazing per se, but despite the demographic, I guess it is nice to see that these films do have some kind of emotional tension. So yeah, this, along with the last movie, definitely aren't the worst things in the world, but I am never fucking watching them again. So, just as I thought I'd have to end this retrospective with Paw Patrol of all things, I remembered earlier this year, we had another animated movie release that qualifies for this video. So, what's the movie in question? Back in 2020, a streaming service called HBO Max launched. One of its launch titles would be the most recent Looney Tunes series, simply titled Looney Tunes Cartoons. Instead of the show wanting to try something different with the franchise like superheroes or sitcoms, this show went back to the franchise's roots, purely being about slapstick comedy. And it was fairly popular and well received. The very next year, a direct-to-streaming movie based on the show was announced, The Day the Earth Blew Up. However, the very next year, Warner Brothers merged with Discovery, David Zaslav became the new CEO, and what followed was a whole ass laundry list of cancellations and tax write-offs. Thankfully, a few projects did manage to survive this merger, but were released by other companies, The Day the Earth Blew Up being one of them. Like I said, it was originally going to be a TV movie, but the company releasing the movie, Catch Up Entertainment, decided to put it in theaters. And that's where we are today. Despite not watching much Looney Tunes, I wanted to support this movie, so I saw it in theaters when it came out and thought it was pretty good. It didn't blow me away or anything, but it was solid. And rewatching the film for this video, not much has changed. The film centers around Daffy Duck and Porky Pig living together, but their house is about to be taken away from them after a meteor destroys their roof. In order to make the money they need to repair the roof, the two land a job at a gum factory. Later on in the film, an alien comes to Earth and plots to use said gum for a seemingly nefarious purpose. Daffy and Porky find out about this, and with help from Petunia Pig, they have to stop the alien. Right off the bat, the animation is very good. Very fluid, very expressive. There's even some pretty good lighting here and there. The comedy's alright, not the funniest film in the world, but there were still some good bits. I like this one visual gag of Daffy crying. This influencer joke was pretty good, and I kinda like Petunia's bit of tasting random shit. Daffy, Porky, and Petunia also have pretty solid chemistry. I really enjoyed Porky and Petunia's romance, but the film's emotional core is between Daffy and Porky, and how Porky's friendship with Daffy is being tested, thanks to Daffy's screwball tendencies, sometimes getting him into trouble. It's not hard to understand Porky's frustrations, and why he doesn't really want Daffy helping with the mission. Seeing as this is Looney Tunes, it's not the most emotional thing ever, but it's still pretty well handled. And this arc does get paid off pretty well by the end. If I were to complain, I guess the alien character could have been funnier, and I guess his obsession with boba tea is kinda humorous, but aside from that, he was kinda whatever. All in all, Day the Earth Blew Up is pretty good. I may not have absolutely loved it per se, but it's cool that seemingly other people got more out of it than I did. Hey, given the story behind this movie, I'm just glad it got released at all, let alone theatrically. If you ask me, it's not that great, but it's still a fun enough watch. And with that, we have officially reached the end of this retrospective. Watching all of these vastly different films back to back was definitely fun. It really made me realize just how hit or miss these films can be. Sometimes these movies can be cheap kiddie schlock put in theaters for a quick buck, but other times they actually put in the effort to make it feel like a friggin' movie, and craft a genuine engaging adventure with a group of characters audiences grew attached to. These movies may have died down in recent years, probably because of executives believing audiences would rather experience certain shows on TV for free, and the lack of new cartoons gaining traction these days. But if it wasn't obvious, this subgenre never truly died out. As of recording this, there's a Gabby's Dollhouse currently in theaters that released a week ago. Being another preschool show, I never really watched Gabby's Dollhouse. But hey, it must have been popular enough to warrant a movie. This December, we're also getting our 4th major SpongeBob movie. Given the last 2 movies though, I'm kinda skeptical. Not helping on the fact that they seemingly got rid of the 3rd movie style. And the Flying Dutchman is gonna be the main villain, but for some reason he's not voiced by Brian Doyle Murray. Hi, so editing me here, I ended up seeing the movie in theaters, and it's actually not bad. Easily the best of the theatrical SpongeBob sequels. But on a more positive note, next year we'll see our very first animated film based on Avatar: The Last Airbender. 2D animated, no less. As someone who recently became a huge fan of the series, this is easily one of my most anticipated films of next year. We're also getting a 3rd Paw Patrol movie, which will be dinosaur themed this time around. Don't really care for that. Not much to say about these next 3 announcements. Like I established earlier, they recently just announced another Simpsons movie. And a few weeks after that, while this is technically based on a foreign show, we're getting a Bluey movie. Lastly, there's reportedly another Teen Titans Go movie in the works. Honestly, after the last film, I'd be down for another one. It's safe to say, I don't think this subgenre is going anywhere anytime soon. These kinds of movies definitely are strange, but hey, that's what makes them so fascinating. And no matter what, I'll always be interested in this subgenre of film animation. Okay, bye.